Chapter 195. There were nobility and lowliness in life. Life was destined to be unequal from birth. This could be seen at a glance. Aristocrats, lowly commoners. Poor people worked hard all their lives, but in the end, they might not even have a single grain of rice to eat or a roof to cover their bodies. Aristocrats had nothing to do all day, but they could enjoy most of the resources and control the fate of the lowly commoner's life was neither noble nor lowly. The divine light religion's teachings said so. All right, let's put this aside. In another situation, life was also equal. For example, in the face of death. In the face of death, no one's life was more precious. It only depended on whose means of survival were more effective. Arrows poured down like rain, and the cold cone-shaped metal whistled as they drilled into the warm flesh. At this moment, life or death was something that could be decided in an instant. Ironically, if the soldiers had aimed more accurately, most of the arrows would have been blocked by the shields. If they had missed, it would have been an innocent life. Needless to say, in the face of death, everyone was afraid. The difference was that the cowards had already died many times before they died, while the brave only needed to taste death once. Tang In and the others were undoubtedly brave. They had risked their lives to obtain the shields, and now they had the right to live. Arthur, save me. David, save me. Everyone had heard pleas many times before, but the shield could only cover so much space. Whether it was selfish or cold-blooded, under such circumstances, no one would allow anyone to enter. However, this person actually called out Tang In and David's names, which was surprising. Tang In turned his head and saw a gray-bearded old man not far away. He was looking at them with a panicked expression. It was old Bill. His luck was not bad, and he did not seem to be injured. Thinking quickly, Tang In said decisively, "Let him in." Huh? Fry and the others raised their heads in surprise. There was space for one person to enter. However, the situation that they were about to face next had to be considered. Everyone understood the principle of not worrying about scarcity, but worrying about uneven distribution. Doing so would easily cause a chain reaction. "He's useful to us," Tang In explained. Fry glanced around and said, "That's Old Bill. Let him in." Old Bill had been in the mine for many years and had taught many new people. Naturally, he knew most of them. Someone immediately rushed out and pulled Old Bill into the team with a shield. Whoosh! Sure enough, when the surrounding people saw Bill enter, they immediately went into an uproar. Following that, a large group of people rushed over. Fry swung his spear and roared, "Kill, kill, kill." In this kind of situation, there was no room for hesitation. He had to use iron-blooded methods to suppress them. Otherwise, this small team would instantly collapse. At this time, everyone's eyes were red with killing intent. Without phrase order, they all aimed their weapons at the vital points of the incoming crowd. Most of these miners were ordinary people. Naturally, they were no match for the battle-hardened group. Actually, in this kind of battle, it was nothing more than being ruthless enough. The people on Tang In's side could still kill their opponents without frowning after being stabbed several times, but the miners couldn't do the same. After a few more waves of people were killed with bloody methods, the crowd retreated once again. It could be said that they were a complete tragedy. Just like how they didn't dare to kill the pursuing soldiers earlier, they also didn't have the heart to fight with their lives on the line. Otherwise, even if Tang In and the rest were made of iron, how many nails could they hit? After getting through this crisis, everyone finally squeezed to the back. This place was slightly safer. For the time being, it was not within the range of the soldiers in the mine. With the courage from before, the miners naturally didn't dare to provoke them. They quickly opened up a path for them to pass. "Quick, quick, go to the wooden door." Everyone's life and death situation wasn't as simple as reaching the safe zone. At this time, there was an empty space below the wooden door. The soldiers had used arrows to clear this space in order to prevent the miners from destroying the wooden door. However, Tang In and the rest were carrying shields now. Naturally, they weren't afraid of this. Following the path made by the crowd, they quickly rushed to the front of the empty space. Whoosh, 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 bang, bang, bang. just as everyone approached the wooden door, a rain of arrows immediately rained down from above. The arrows hit the shields and made bang-bang sounds. Hold on, hold on. Go over there. Fry waved his spear and led everyone to where the door had collapsed earlier. Titan, smash it open. We'll cover you. All right. Titan didn't hesitate to swing his war blade. With a few quick steps, the red light of his fighting aura exploded. He attacked like a waterfall. Boom! Wood chips flew everywhere. The door trembled slightly. Titan's body swayed, and he couldn't help but take a step back. This door was made of ironwood and was about a few inches thick. This attack didn't have much effect. Open for me. Titan didn't wait for a breather. He took a step forward, his fighting aura exploding violently. Another thunder slash came down. Boom! The war blade shattered. Titan was sent flying back. The door shook violently. The collapsed area sank a little. I'll do it, David roared and rushed forward. He raised his war blade high with both hands. Yellow fighting aura flowed as he slashed down quickly. At this time, the people above were anxious. They had chased the miners away with the intention of not letting them near the door. But who would have thought that they'd shot themselves in the foot? A group of miners actually dared to attack the door. Rumble. Soon, the counterattack from above arrived. A thick and solid rolling log fell down heavily. Fuck, hold on, hold on. Fry threw away his spear and shouted with his shield on his shoulder. Life and death depended on this. They had no way out now. Bang, puff, blood spurted out of their mouths. Although everyone tried their best, the weight of the rolling log and the gravity of the fall from above immediately scattered the shields that were gathered together. Once they were scattered, the rain of arrows took advantage of the opportunity. A few people were nailed to the ground on the spot. Quick, gather. Although the deaths of their teammates were infuriating, now wasn't the time to think about it. Fry ordered everyone to raise their shields again and gather in front of the door. Bang, bang, bang. David had gone berserk. He slashed at the collapsed area more than 10 times in a row. The door trembled more and more, and the collapsed area deepened. But the effect wasn't obvious. If they continued to slash like this, they wouldn't have enough time. David stopped slashing. Tang glanced around and pointed at the rolling log that caused them to lose a few of their teammates. We'll use this to knock it down. Good idea. Frey's eyes lit up. He quickly ordered everyone to retreat. Rumble. Just as everyone retreated, a rolling log coincidentally landed behind them. It rolled a few times until it reached their feet. Everyone opened their mouths and was stunned. Damn, we finally did something good. Don't be shy. Quickly carry. The team split into groups again. A few tall and strong men carried the thick log under the cover of everyone. Fry looked at the movement above through the gaps between the shields. Are you ready? Yes. The few men replied in a deep voice. Charge. The people above saw a long snake-shaped shield charging towards the door. Although there were only a few dozen people, they gave off a tragic aura. Boom! It was like thunder in their ears. The entire mountain gate trembled and groaned. More than a dozen archers staggered and fell down one after another like dumplings in a pot. The collapsed wooden door was completely deflated. A glimmer of light appeared. Through the gap, they could see the situation inside the mine. Replace them, back off again. Fry ordered concisely. A few burly men immediately walked out and replaced their companions whose hands were trembling because of the recoil. Back off, back off. Tang looked up and quickly said, Rumble. Needless to say, the soldiers above pushed the rolling log down again. But when it fell, everyone had already retreated a few feet. At this time, the miners behind them also knew what Tang and the others were planning. They were all excited. Of course, it was impossible to expect them to help. Charge. Rumble. Charge again. Rumble. Under the continuous impact, the entire mountain gate was shaking. If one looked from the inside, they would see that the iron nails on the 4 sides of the wooden door had severely fallen off. Lowly people, rats, damn it. The people above were going crazy. If the lowly people below really broke open the door, then the attackers would drive straight in and they would die without a doubt. Retribution, Were they really going to die in the hands of these lowly people? They were unwilling, but now they could only watch as the people kept attacking the door. Arrows? No effect. Rolling logs? Well, it actually helped them instead. Catapults? In the previous attack, the enemy soldiers had already rushed to the top of the wall and destroyed it. Mjolnir? Don't joke. How could there be such a thing here? Are you ready? Yes. Charged. The people who were howling had already forgotten how many times they had charged. At this time, their eyes were only fixed on the crumbling part that kept cracking open. It was gonna break, it was gonna break. Rumble, Titan, who was charging at the front of the rolling log, felt his hand slip and involuntarily crashed into the wooden door. Pa! His shoulder was firmly grabbed by a large hand. When he turned around, it was David. The two of them looked at each other and laughed awkwardly. It broke. It broke. Ha! Suddenly, there was an ecstatic shout. The shields gathered, and everyone saw the front end of the rolling log pass through the swaying wooden door and hang on it. As for the other half of the wooden door, half of it was slanted, and only a few broken branches were still trying to hold it together. Tangan took a look and said decisively, "Damn. What are you waiting for? Kick it." Ha! Kick it together, kick it together. Fry laughed and raised his foot. Bang, bang, bang. Dozens of people raised their feet and kicked the door from different directions. One kick, two kicks. In an instant, the shadows of kicks flew, and it was a spectacular sight. Creak, creak. No one knew who kicked the last kick, but the thick and sturdy half of the wooden door shook a few times and finally fell back. Boom! The earth trembled and dust flew into the air. What a turbid yet clear world. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 196. It's down, it's really down. God of light, thank you for your blessings. Haha, we're saved. Seeing half of the wooden door collapse, the crowd cheered one after another. Of course, there were even more people who charged forward silently. One had to know that the soldiers behind them were getting closer and closer. However, would there be a way to survive if they ran in? Not necessarily. Many of them had just been killed by the soldiers in the mine. However, at this time, the crowd couldn't care less. They had to run in the same direction. It was good to live a little longer. Whoosh, 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 the rain of arrows above covered the crowd in an instant. At this distance, with such a dense crowd, the archers almost didn't need to aim, and the people fell. However, this couldn't stop the tide of people now. At this time, the miners showed a fearless spirit and ran straight to the door under the rain of arrows. Are you idiots? Don't care about those untouchables. Shoot the soldiers behind. A commander-like person shouted. This was a helpless choice, but also a wise one. No matter what, the door fell. Since it fell, there would be people coming in. Compared to these useless miners, the soldiers behind were their main enemies. After the rain of arrows changed direction, the miners ran even more happily. In the blink of an eye, there were already people at the gate. Tang In and the others had a strange expression at this time. After seeing the crowd rushing over, they looked at each other and collectively took a step to the side, making way for them to enter. Whoosh! The crowd was like a stream. The width of half of the wooden door was still very wide, but at this time, it was obviously not enough. The crowd was constantly squeezing inside, as if it was the entrance of the reclining park. Tang and touch his nose, cough, cough, that it's dangerous inside. The crowd continued to surge, shoulder to shoulder. As far as the eye could see, there were joyful faces everywhere. Krika, Tang In, and the others widened their eyes, and their eyes followed the half of the wooden door that was still left shaking left and right. Left, right, left, left, left. Boom! Under the pressure of the crowd, the half-intact wooden door struggled for less than a few seconds before it collapsed with a loud bang. Damn, it can't be, compared to the current situation, and then thinking about how they had worked so hard just now to tear down half of it. Tang In and the others suddenly felt that they were weak. Puff, puff, puff. Something seemed to have happened inside. The crowd that had rushed in suddenly let out continuous screams. TSK, TSK. Tang In shrugged helplessly. I told you that it's dangerous. Why don't you believe me? Inside were the long spearmen from the mine who had chased them out earlier. When Tang In and the others knocked down the wooden door, they saw that the other party had already set up a formation and were waiting for them. Of course, their original target should be the attacking soldiers who rushed in at the end, but they didn't expect to see the returning miners. How should I put it? This is fate. Tang In and the others immediately retreated to the side with tears streaming down their faces. For these soldiers, they might not be willing to attack these useless miners. But now that the arrow was knocked on the bow, if they didn't attack, their formation would collapse in an instant. As for the miners who rushed in first, they really wanted to retreat now, but the crowd was surging and they were forced to move forward. So in the end, the two sides finally fought. After a while, about half of the crowd had rushed out, and Tang In and the others collectively joined in. In any case, this was indeed the only way out. Of course, they couldn't always take the lead. The number of spearmen was naturally not as many as the miners, and the archers above did not provide support. So under the constant retreat, the formation was already on the verge of collapse. This was the result of the miners rushing for their lives. Otherwise, if a real battle really broke out, they would have been killed first before the soldiers behind could press on. TSK, it's too scary. Tang In and the others looked sympathetically at the struggling soldiers and easily bypassed them. Let's go to the mine. Fry led everyone to the front of the mountain. This was their plan from the beginning. The attacking soldiers would definitely be able to fight their way in, so if they stayed outside, they would be slaughtered. Only by finding a way to rush back to the mine would they have a chance to survive. There were two ways to survive. First, the soldiers would not kill the miners after occupying the mine. This was possible. After all, miners were really hard to find. Of course, if the soldiers were angered by their previous actions and chose to kill, then they could only hope for the second way to survive, which was the mine. Old Bill said that the mountain had been opened up before. Although it was later sealed, they should still be able to get out after cleaning up. Of course, this was more risky because no one knew the specific situation. This was also the reason why Tang In and Fry risked their lives to save Old Bill when they saw him. Old Bill was very familiar with the mine. He could almost find the place with his eyes closed. It's that mine. After understanding what Tang In and the others meant, Old Bill quickly pointed out the location. But I only know the route. I don't know the situation of the mine being sealed. That place has already been abandoned. That's enough. Tang In nodded, pleased. This was within their expectations. Being able to find the place quickly was already good enough. Soon, they arrived at the entrance of the mine. Of course, they naturally would not go in now, because they had to confirm the attitude of the soldiers first. At this time, the mine was in chaos. After the miners entered, they began to think about what to do next. In the end, most of them came out of the mine. It was not that they thought of sealing the passage, but this was the only way out of the valley. Without the obstruction of the miners and without the entrance, the attacking soldiers quickly pushed into the mine. Some of the soldiers in the mine chose to fight to the end, while others continuously retreated towards the mine. Damn! Tang In and Fry looked at each other. If they let these people come, it would be strange if the attacking soldiers did not kill them. Fry took a deep breath and took a few steps forward. As he was preparing, a voice came from afar. Mine friends, we can't let those soldiers come, or else they will implicate us. We have to catch them and give them to the new mine owner. Only then can we save our lives. Damn, a man of insight. Tang In gave a heartfelt thumbs up in the direction of the voice. If someone else said this, it would definitely be more effective than phrase. After all, they had killed miners before, and it was inevitable that there would be a backlash. Yes, we can't let them come. Damn, they killed us just now. It's time for revenge. More and more miners responded amidst the chaotic shouts. Revenge was a satisfying thing. As long as someone took the lead, the effect would definitely be as strong as steel. In the end, all the miners gathered outside the mine, holding their weapons and confronting the hurried mine soldiers. The mine soldiers were really dumbfounded at this time. What was going on? Were these still the honest miners who did not fight back when they were beaten or scolded? Damn it, do you want to die? A soldier took 2 steps forward, waving his saber. If it were any other time, these miners would definitely shrink back and kowtow to beg for mercy. But at this time, as soon as the soldier's voice fell, a big man with disheveled hair and shackles on his feet walked out, and then directly stabbed with his spear. "Damn, I know you. You're the one who killed my brother." "Who is this?" "I killed his brother." The soldier was shocked. Without thinking carefully, he quickly raised his saber to parry. But the spear was actually a feint. When it was about to hit the soldier, it lightly drew a half arc in the air and then instantly accelerated, piercing the soldier's throat. "Brother, I finally avenged you." The big man with the spear threw away the spear and couldn't help but cover his face and cry. "Revenge! We want revenge. It's you, don't hide. I remember you. You killed my father. Poor him. He was 70 years old, but he was beaten to death by you." Influenced by the big man with the spear, the miners were agitated and constantly pressed forward to denounce fiercely. The mine soldiers were few in number, and they did a lot of bad things. At this time, seeing the crowd rushing up with righteous indignation, they could not help but retreat. TSK, Fry, you're really something. This acting is amazing." "Oh, you're crying." Tang and lamented to Fry, whose hair was disheveled. "No, the wind and sand are blinding my eyes." Fry kept rubbing his eyes gloomily. "If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation." Chapter 197. The scattered sounds of weapons clashing gradually disappeared. At this point, the battle in the mine had gradually calmed down. Most of the defending soldiers who resisted with all their might were killed. In fact, the outcome of this battle was already decided when Tang knocked down the wooden door and all the miners rushed in. After the attacking soldiers cleared the obstacles at the door, they went straight to the back of the mine. But soon, they stopped in their tracks because a very strange scene appeared in front of them. The escaping soldiers were blocked by the dense crowd of miners. Compared to the attacking soldiers who were watching a joke, the soldiers of Solomon who were blocked were much more flustered. Which idiot came up with the idea of sending weapons to these miners? With their escape route cut off and the valley surrounded by mountains on 3 sides, they finally experienced the feeling of being attacked from 2 sides and being cornered. The stalemate lasted until the commander of the soldiers at the back arrived. He was a beardless man wearing big leaf fish scale armor. Without a doubt, his arrival meant that the front of the mine was completely under control. The man looked at the current situation and was stunned for a moment. Then he laughed and said, "Are you guys acting out a play? Not bad, continue. Carrie, it's you. Isn't your Hogan family afraid of our Solomon overlord's revenge for doing this?" A fat man with a face full of anger walked out from the crowd of soldiers. Tang had heard of this man before. He was the mine owner in charge of this mine. "Oh, it's Frake." The man called Carrie curled his lips and mocked. "You're thinking too far ahead. You should be worried about the revenge of these miners. You." Frake's face turned red, but he had nothing to say. What was more embarrassing than being surrounded by your own miners? "Sir, hello." At this time, a miner with shackles walked out from the crowd and bowed to Carrie. "I'm a miner here. I'm willing to serve Overlord Hogan." "Me too. Us too." The miners raised their hands in the air, and their shouts rose and fell. Good. If he's willing to work for us, that's naturally a good thing." Carrie laughed heartily before pointing at Fulik and saying, "Then help me kill this fat pig right now." "Carrie, you've gone too far." Fulik's expression changed, and he quickly retreated to the soldiers. Although he was the highest leader of the mine, he was only responsible for handling administrative matters. He was a layman when it came to fighting. The miner hesitated. Naturally, everyone was willing to kill Fulik. After all, they had suffered a lot under his hands. However, there were still a lot of soldiers around Fulik. It would be dangerous to just charge him like this. "What's wrong? Is there a problem?" Carrie narrowed his eyes as his expression darkened. "Oh, no. The miner who stood out earlier hurriedly waved his hand, then gritted his teeth and shouted to the back, 'Brothers, we can only kill the mine owner now. This fat pig has a way to survive.' Everyone, come with me. All right, let's go, let's go. There's so many of us. There won't be a problem. The miner did not have the guts to fight alone. However, it was still possible to take advantage of the situation and stab him in the back. However, Tang did not think this way. He quickly said in a low voice, "This person is up to no good. Everyone, prepare to retreat into the mine." Tangin's reasoning was simple. Previously, they were forced out of the mine. Although their combat power was limited, they still killed a lot of people, especially their small team. However, Carrie did not mention anything about it. He was smiling as if he had forgotten about it. This was very unreasonable for a general to lead an army. Therefore, the biggest possibility was that Carrie wanted to see them fight each other so that he could reap the benefits easily. Fry was born on the battlefield and was also an officer. Naturally, he could understand Tang's words. He nodded and gave the order. At this time, the angry miners pressed forward again. The mine soldiers now had no place to retreat. Although there were some who shouted not to be fooled by the other party, the miners ignored them because of their usual misdeeds. After a while, the battle broke out again. The soldiers who were at a disadvantage were surrounded in the middle and were beaten up badly. Lord Hogan's soldiers watched with relish. Every time a soldier in the mine was beaten to death, they would roar with laughter. "We surrender, we surrender." A few well-dressed managers in the middle of the soldiers could not stand the pressure. They waved their white handkerchiefs and called for surrender. These soldiers still had the combat power. In the short battle, the miners had already lost a lot of people. When they heard the other side surrender, the miners breathed a sigh of relief. They relaxed their hands and looked up at Carrie. Unexpectedly, Carrie acted as if he did not hear them. He was still smiling as he looked at the sorry state of the soldiers in the mine. Not speaking at this time was also an attitude. He was going to kill them all. The miners had no choice but to attack again with their swords. The soldiers in the mine were in despair. They knew that they would not be spared today. Thinking of this, they erupted with the aura of a mourning soldier and started a fight to the death with the miners. For a moment, they had the upper hand. Of course, this advantage could not last long. There were too many miners. When a sword was handed out, 7 or 8 random weapons would stab at it. Gradually, more and more soldiers in the mine fell. "Not good, retreat." Tang, who had been wandering on the periphery, shouted. He instantly left the battle circle and ran toward the mine. It turned out that when the battle was about to end, the attacking soldiers had quietly spread out and surrounded them from both sides. Fry and the others knew what was going on. When they heard Tang's reminder, dozens of people immediately retreated at the same time and ran wildly. "Hey, catch them!" Carrie frowned and waved his hand to order the soldiers to chase from both sides. "Everyone run! These soldiers are going to kill us all." Tang saw the situation and immediately shouted at the top of his lungs. He did this not to save the people out of kindness, but because they needed these miners to distract the pursuing soldiers. Of course, this could also be considered as indirectly saving some people's lives. Hearing Tang shout, the miners, who had gone berserk, were all stunned. When they finally saw the soldiers surrounding them from both sides, they were immediately shocked and panicked. "Everyone, don't panic. Continue to kill. I'm just preventing the soldiers from running away. Yes, those who run now, don't blame me for killing you when I catch you later." Carrie's expression changed, and he quickly reacted and shouted. This excuse was very clumsy because the miners had already surrounded the soldiers in 3 layers. How could there be any possibility of escape? However, there were still people who believed, or rather, there were still people who believed because even if they entered the mine, it would be a dead end. Therefore, they would rather bet on Carrie's character. Of course, there were still some people who understood. When they realized that they had been tricked, they immediately broke away from the crowd and fled. Even the soldiers inside seized the opportunity and quickly rushed out, heading straight for the mine. "Damn it! Kill, kill, kill." Carrie's smile was no longer on his face. The cooked duck had flown away just like that. If they let these people escape into the mine, then they would have to go through a lot of trouble in the future. At this moment, Tang and the rest had already run to the mine that was previously connected to the mountain. Suddenly, A wave of blood-curdling screams came from behind them. Everyone turned their heads and saw that the soldiers on both sides had surrounded the miners and immediately raised their butcher's knives. Sigh. Someone sighed. Although they had expected this situation, these people only had themselves to blame. However, when they saw the soldiers slaughtering the stunned miners like they were slaughtering poultry, they still felt a little sad in their hearts. The miners were still valuable. If the commander of the invading soldiers this time was someone like Frake, then they might be able to keep their lives. However, the commander this time was a general. After seeing the miners kill his soldiers, how could he tolerate it? Let's go. Tang and shook his head and led Bill into the mine. Everyone turned their heads and followed him in, unable to bear the sight. The mountain was densely packed with mines, like stars in the night sky. Therefore, as long as they reached here first, they would be able to enter without any problems. The pursuing soldiers, on the other hand, were somewhat hesitant. Although there was only one entrance to the mine, there were as many branches as there were hairs on an ox. Rushing in rashly would not have any effect. After about 10 minutes, the sounds of running, shouting, and blood-curdling screams all disappeared, and the mine fell into silence. Lord Hogan's soldiers had finally occupied the mine, but Carrie's face was gloomy and did not look happy at all. They stepped over the pile of miners' corpses and came to the mountain that was filled with mines. At least 500 people had escaped into the mine. If they did not find these people, then the mine would not be able to operate. Go and get me the map of the mine. Yes. Naturally, the mine had a record of every tunnel. This was to analyze the distribution of the mine and prevent people from getting lost. Carrie looked at the pursuing soldiers and asked in a deep voice, "Which tunnel did that fat pig enter?" Just now, when the miners were still in a daze, Follick had also escaped with the soldiers. "Sir, it's this one." A soldier came out and pointed at a tunnel. Carrie nodded and said viciously, "Men, organize 500 people to enter this tunnel and search every inch of it." After a pause, Carrie frowned and looked at the bottom of his feet. The surrounding soldiers also looked down in shock. They felt as if there were many ants under their feet, and they were trembling slightly. Then the mountain in front of them started to shake, and some rocks began to fall. They fell to the ground with a clattering sound, then rolled slightly and kept rolling. "Retreat, retreat quickly." Carrie seemed to have thought of something. His face instantly turned pale, and his voice became a little shrill. Bang! The ground began to shake violently, and some soldiers lost their footing and fell to the ground in a sorry state. Dee-dee-dee-dee, earthquake, rumble. The huge mountain began to shake as well, and millstone-sized boulders danced happily on the steep mountain surface. On this unusual afternoon, a violent energy suddenly erupted from the ground, causing the mountains to collapse and the earth to cave in, causing all living beings to tremble in fear. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 198. In the deep and narrow dark tunnel, there were scattered piles of dirt and stones, bright and dim flashing stones. In this place far from the surface, the silent atmosphere devoured all life. Suddenly, bang! The sound of rocks tumbling could be heard from far and near in the tunnel, echoing. Then there was a series of fine and small sounds, as if sand and sand were falling. Tang waved his hand to get rid of the dirt and stones on his body. He looked around blankly. What's going on? That's right, we entered the mine. Under Bill's guidance, they walked for more than 10 minutes and passed through many twists and turns in the mine. Then, the soles of their feet trembled, and the world spun around them. Everything turned black. Yes, that was it. He touched his forehead subconsciously. There was a big bump there, and it seemed to have broken, but it had already formed a scar. Earthquake. Tang groaned. Damn it. He felt that something was wrong with the earthquake this morning. It had been half a day, but he still couldn't avoid it. He stood up shakily, and there was a burning pain all over his body. Some are old wounds from before, and some are new abrasions. After touching his body, Tang let out a long sigh of relief, and his mood was much better. Not bad. He was still alive, and the parts were still there. It was really good. In this kind of environment, to be able to survive the earthquake, Tang In was satisfied. Bang! Suddenly, a hand reached out from the pile of dirt not far from Tang. TSK, TSK. It really felt like the villains in the movies were not completely dead. Tang In turned his head and glanced over. He couldn't help but sigh. Evil thoughts flashed through his mind, and Tang In walked over and began to remove the layer of dirt on top of the pile of dirt. Naturally, the person below was not a villain. It could only be one of the people in the group from before. Crash! A figure was pulled out by Tang In like a radish. Although the person's face was covered in dirt, he could still recognize that it was Misho from the feminine shape of his face. "Oh, boss, well, not bad. Your brain isn't damaged." Tang In nodded and looked at it. "Congratulations, all the parts are here." Misho, who had just come out of the mound, was a little stunned. "All right, let's check your injuries. If there aren't any major problems, hurry up and help us poach them." Tang In's tone was very relaxed now because he was used to seeing life and death. He had already gained the ability to control his emotions. However, he didn't want to think about what had happened to David and the others. Bang, 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 more and more people woke up one after another, struggling to get out. These people were all lucky, like Misho. During the previous earthquake, only the soil layer and the falling stones didn't hurt their vital organs. Therefore, after passing out, they were able to react. Fry, Titan, David, Old Bill, Luke, Harry. Previously, there were more than 30 people in the team. Now, in the past 15 minutes, more than 10 people had come out. Tang In's pupils had long since turned into the shape of almonds. He activated Peep and scanned his surroundings. "You guys came here to dig. Misho and David came here. Over there, too. Yes, right under your feet. Everyone had been walking together from the beginning, so it was easy to find them. Even so, everyone still looked at Tang in shock. In such a dark environment, how could he tell where people were? Although they had doubts, looking at Tang Un's expressionless face, they didn't dare to be negligent and started digging according to the instructions. 1-2. As more and more of their companions were dug out, they looked at Tang and more like they were looking at the god of light. Praise the god, this was really a miracle. Half an hour later, everyone finally gathered again. Of course, some of them were lying down. There were many sharp and heavy stones in the tunnel, which had great lethality in the earthquake. Fry and Titan's people had 5 dead and 3 seriously injured. One of the members of the gray space had died, and one was seriously injured. The dead people were placed together, and everyone stood silently to the side. The flickering glass stone illuminated Tang Un's face. He looked at the dead member speechlessly. What was this person's name again? Oh, Felix, it meant happy or lucky. Lucky? Why can't you be lucky again? You survived so many days of being hunted. I still have a lot to teach you. You haven't become a hero yet. I haven't brought you back yet. This was the first time the gray space had lost a member. He didn't die at the hands of the enemy, but in the earthquake. In other words, they couldn't find anyone to take revenge on. Boss, David came over with red eyes. The burial pit is ready. Good. Tang In nodded gently. He bent down and searched Felix's body and took out a short sword. He looked at it, put it close to his body, and waved his hand. Bury him. The burial pit was not far from them, and it was covered with stones to prevent the bodies from being bitten by underground creatures like rats before they decomposed. 6 people were placed side by side, and everyone was silent for 3 minutes. They were buried with stones and then covered with soil. After dealing with this matter, everyone gradually calmed down. The dead were gone, and the living had to continue to live. If they didn't think of a way to solve their current predicament, it would be a problem whether or not there was anyone to bury them. The place we dug through is at the foot of the opposite mountain. After the earthquake, that place will definitely be affected. What's worse is that we can't be sure what will happen to the mine in front. Bill helplessly spread out his left hand. His right hand had been broken in the earthquake just now. What about going back? Is it possible to go back? Fry thought for a moment, and then said, the people outside must have known about the earthquake just now. Even if the mine is destroyed, they can't still be guarding there. Impossible. Bill shook his head. The front of the mine has been dug the most, and there are too many tunnels. That must be the place where the collapse was the most serious. Now it must be tightly blocked. This was obvious. The more holes there were, the looser the geographical structure would be. Then we'll stick to the original plan and continue to move forward. Tang had decided. Naturally, no one had any objections. This was the only way to survive. However, this originally smooth road was not very smooth now. Due to the earthquake, the original mine tunnel had deviated. Of course, because they had Bill with them, this was not a big problem. The key was the rocks. These rocks that fell from the top were placed vertically and horizontally, blocking everyone's path. Some of the rocks were not piled up high, and they were still able to pass over them. However, some of the rocks were piled up to the point where there were only a few gaps. They had to use weapons to slowly pry open the gaps before they could barely pass through. As such, the path that originally only took half an hour would now take 2 hours, or even more. However, if it was really just a matter of time, everyone was still very willing. Unfortunately, not good. Tang narrowed his eyes and quickly walked around some of the rocks. This was a huge rock that had fallen from the top. It had completely blocked the path, and there was no way forward. Bang, bang, bang. Feeling the heavy force returning to his palm, Tang's face darkened. This huge rock was at least 1 zhang thick. At this time, Fry and the others had also rushed over. When they saw the huge rock, their faces changed. After testing it a little, they came to the same conclusion as Tang. What should we do? Taitan wrung his hands, his face bitter. David asked, "Can we use weapons to cut it open?" Bill shook his head dejectedly. "That's impossible. I know you have fighting energy, but this is a rock. It's so thick that it can't be cut open. In the past, a branch of the mine had to be abandoned because of this. Then what if we dig a tunnel to the side to go around it?" Tang touched the wall beside the tunnel and asked. "That won't work." Bill sighed, his wrinkled face tangled. "Rocks are not easy to break. Once they appear, they will be whole. Look at the curvature of this rock. If we continue to extend it like this, it will be at least 10 zhang long. If we dig like this, the project will be too big. We don't have that much time." Everyone suddenly understood. They were currently eating black bread for lunch. Even if they had the limit of hunger, they would only be able to dig for a few days at most. Who could guarantee that they would be able to dig a tunnel in this time? Who could guarantee that similar problems would not occur in the future? Thinking of this, everyone silently squatted at the side. Had they finally reached a dead end? Pa! Suddenly, Bill slapped his thigh and jumped up. He shouted in ecstasy, "Got it!" Got what?" "There's a way." Bill's lips trembled as he pointed to the back. "I remember that there's a branch of the mine. We will dig from there, go around this huge rock, and then dig back." Tang and the others were overjoyed. At this moment, Bill's wrinkled forehead looked so cute in everyone's eyes. They did not save him for nothing. Tang and Fry turned their heads at the same time. They looked at each other and grinned. Now that they had a way, they had to quickly implement it. To them, time was life. The place that Bill had pointed to was still some distance away. Hence, they had to walk back for a while. However, just as they were about to turn a corner, Tang-un's ears twitched, and he suddenly stopped in his tracks. As he was walking at the front, the rest of the people behind him naturally stopped as well. Fry said in surprise, "What show?" Tang raised his finger to keep quiet. Although they felt that it was a little strange, they still held their breaths when they thought about how Tang-in had looked for his companions buried underground. The tunnel once again fell into silence. This was absolute silence. Everyone could even hear the sound of their own hearts beating. After a while, Tang-in squinted his eyes into the darkness behind him. "Someone is following us. If you like this work, you're welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation." Chapter 199. Someone's following us. The long tunnel was full of twists and turns. Any sound would spread and reverberate in all directions. As long as one's ears were sharp enough, they would be able to hear something even if they were far away. "Someone's there." Fry was stunned. He whispered, "Is it a miner?" Although he did not hear anything, he did not doubt Tangen's judgment. It should be, it could be a soldier too. Tang, and only heard the sound of rocks rolling on the ground. Naturally, he could not tell who the person was. Logically speaking, the surviving miners who escaped here were the most likely ones. Of course, if there were soldiers who immediately chased after them and survived the earthquake, it would also make sense. If it's a miner, we'll have more people to help us. But we still have to be on guard. Titan looked around and frowned. The terrain here is not good for an ambush. After entering the branch tunnel, there was only one route. Although the environment was dark, other than the bend, all they could see was an open space. Moreover, this tunnel was only wide enough for 3 people to walk side by side. If they encountered danger, they could only fight head-on. An ambush is not likely. Tang shook his head and calmly analyzed. We pushed away the piles of rocks before. Anyone who comes will know at a glance that there are people passing by. Fry nodded. Then let's wait here. Let's hope it's someone popular. This was just a turn. Although they could not directly help in battle, they could at least discover the enemy first. Tang looked him up and down and nodded thoughtfully in agreement. The group moved some rocks to block the front and placed a few who were seriously injured at the back. Then, they silently waited for the enemy's arrival. Thud, thud, thud. Not long after, the sound of light footsteps could be heard. Fry frowned and exchanged glances with Titan. There were at least 100 people. Of course, it was not accurate to estimate the number of people by the sound of their footsteps, but it was not difficult for veterans to estimate the number of people. The flickering glass stones constantly emitted bright and dark light. Under such circumstances, the range of vision was at most 100 meters. They're here. Everyone held their breath and looked ahead. Kacha! Kacha! Just as the other party was getting closer and closer, the sound of something colliding could be heard. Not good. Frey's heart sank. He was very clear about this sound. It was the sound of armor rubbing against each other as the soldiers walked. Tap, tap, tap. Sure enough, the crowd saw rows of soldiers wearing plate armor and wielding spears and greatswords rushing into their field of vision. Since they could see each other from this side, the other side could also see the pile of rocks after walking a few dozen meters forward. Stop. With a command, a middle-aged man with a black beard walked out. It's him. Fry and the others knew this person. He was the one who drove everyone out of the wooden house. In other words, the people behind them were actually soldiers from a mine. Moving his line of sight back, Fu Lake and a few other mine executives were also there. When Fry and the others escaped, these people were still surrounded and beaten by the miners. They didn't expect them to escape in the end. The middle-aged man squinted at the stone bunker and drew his sword. Stop hiding and come out. I didn't expect you to have some skills. You actually found us. This kind of hurriedly piled-up bunker naturally couldn't be hidden from the eyes of the observant. Fry saw that the other party didn't have any archers. He stood up and sneered. So what if we found you? Ha! It's your bad luck that we found you. The middle-aged man sneered and waved his sword to signal the soldiers to press forward. Originally, if you obediently opened a path for us, you might have escaped in the end. But now hee-haw? Funny, funny. Fry looked up to the sky and laughed. Don't you want to know why we stopped moving forward? Oh, tell me. The middle-aged man was calm. His expression didn't change at all. However, a fat man wearing a gorgeous velvet robe behind him was impatient. Why are you talking nonsense with these gophers? Let's just kill them and hurry up. Hurry up? Ha! Fry shook his head and laughed. There's a huge rock blocking the way ahead. Tell me, how should we hurry up? What? Impossible. Exclamations of shock rang out. The faces of the people on the other side changed drastically. They all made a living in the mines. Even if they didn't work in the mines, they naturally knew what it meant to have a rock blocking the way. You're lying to us, right? Fry rushed out of the soldiers and shouted in panic. Fry spread out his hands. Do you think it's necessary? The people on the other side came back to their senses. Indeed, the miners had no reason to lie to them. If there was no obstruction ahead, even if they found out that there were people behind them, they would only hurry up and not stop to wait. How is it possible? How is it possible? Fry mumbled to himself. Although he had recovered from a shock, the bad news still made him panic. The soldiers had the same reaction. If the road ahead was blocked, they could only wait here and wait for death. By then, hunger, fear, just the thought of it was enough to send shivers down one's spine. Clang! There was a loud noise and sparks. The middle-aged man put away his sword gloomily. Everyone, don't panic. This is just empty talk. Let's kill them first, and then go take a look. It's useless, it's useless. Rock, didn't you hear? They have no reason to lie to us. The fat man from before kept waving his hands. His face was full of despair and other negative emotions in the dark light. The middle-aged man frowned. Sir, his words were interrupted. The fat man screamed hysterically at the middle-aged man. Idiot, idiot! Rock, we're all gonna die! Bang, blood splattered everywhere. A huge head flew into the air and rolled for more than 10 meters before stopping. The scene was silent. Everyone's mouth was wide open as they looked at the scene in shock. The middle-aged man slowly wiped the saliva off his face and kicked away the headless body that was still bleeding. Since you know this, you still dare to provoke me? Idiot! The fat man was a high-ranking official in the mine. If they were outside, the middle-aged man would not dare to disobey. But if this was a dead end, then, as the commander of the soldiers, he was undoubtedly the most authoritative person. Even if he killed Fry, who would know? In fact, if he could get out, apart from these soldiers, the high-ranking officials of the mine would definitely be killed. Anyone who shakes the morale of the soldiers will be executed without mercy. The middle-aged man's murderous aura shocked the soldiers. He waved his sword. Kill! Frey's expression changed. He couldn't help but sigh. There was no avoiding it after all. Titan, David, you and I will defend the front line. The rest of you will attack. The mine was narrow. The three soldiers pushed forward in a row. Soon, the two sides were close to each other. Frey's line of defense was undoubtedly sturdy. The three of them all had impetus. David and Titan were beginner warriors. The other was intermediate. Fry was an intermediate warrior. Under the cover of his impetus armor, he had a huge advantage over these ordinary soldiers. Behind them, there were others who would help attack or defend from time to time. In such a way of attacking and defending, the two sides were in a stalemate. Frey's side had a slight advantage. But this situation wouldn't last long. Fry and the others were all heavily injured from the fighting in the morning and the earthquake later. This was especially true for Titan. His arm, which had been broken due to a moment of boredom, was still floating aimlessly in the air. The middle-aged man was shocked when he saw the flashes of impetus. These vulgar gophers had impetus? Looking at their skillful fighting skills, he realized that these weren't miners with pickaxes. They were clearly veterans who had survived hundreds of battles. Why do these people look so familiar? The middle-aged man touched his forehead. Damn it! Weren't these the people who broke the mine door in the morning? Thinking of what Fry and the others did, the middle-aged man was furious. In fact, they had already sent people to ask for help in the morning. As long as they could hold on a little longer, the mine would be fine. But when the door was broken, everything was over. Red combat aura burst out from his arm, covering his sword like flames and spreading to his entire body to form an armor. Out of the way! With a low roar, the middle-aged man strode through the crowd. This kind of fighting aura was naturally eye-catching, but Fry and the others only glanced at it for a moment before looking away. They continued to focus on killing the enemy. Damn it! Feeling underestimated, the middle-aged man cursed and quickened his steps. Some of the soldiers who couldn't dodge in time were directly knocked away. Just when he was about 10 meters away from the front line, suddenly, chill suddenly descended. The middle-aged man was shocked. He suddenly looked up and saw a ghostly black figure in front of him. How could this be? The width of the passageway was relatively narrow, and the height was not very high. For someone as burly as David, he was only a few palms away from the top. But in this short gap, there was actually a person hiding, and the dozens of soldiers passing by below didn't notice either. Hiss! A bloody light that looked as weak as a candle in the wind suddenly appeared. With such terrifying stealth, such a short distance, and such a fast attack, the middle-aged man naturally couldn't react. He could only hope that his impetus armor could block this attack. But he was quickly disappointed. Although the bloody light seemed weak, it was extremely penetrative. The thick impetus armor was penetrated like a thin veil by the bloody light, and the man's neck was instantly chilled. The middle-aged man didn't dare to move. He watched as the black figure landed, turned, and came behind him. Cough, cough, everyone stop. Turn and look at God. Oh, God of light. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 200. Cough, cough. Everyone stop. Turn around and look at God. God of light. Hey, give me some face. It's tiring to stick to the wall for so long. Are you sure you want an awkward silence? The soldiers stared blankly at the black-clothed youth standing behind the commander, speechless. When did this guy appear? Compared to the stunned soldiers, Fry and the others breathed a sigh of relief. Although the battle was short, it was more intense because of the narrow environment. Although they had achieved remarkable results and killed dozens of soldiers, the first line of defense could no longer hold on. David was cut in the arm. If he hadn't dodged quickly, his entire arm would have been left here. Titan was even worse. Because he lacked the support of his left hand, he was shot in the stomach and sent to the back of the heavily injured soldiers, Tang, and had acted at the right time. If he had been a little later, Fry, who was struggling to hold on, would have had to retreat to the second line. At that time, they would have suffered large casualties again. Stop. Let go of the commander, and we'll spare your life. Be careful. Whoosh, amidst the miscellaneous threatening shouts, Tang En's body twisted rapidly like a snake. He grabbed the middle-aged man's shoulder and switched places in an instant. Bang! With a muffled groan, a spear pierced the middle-aged man's chest. If not for the fact that his battle energy armor was still activated, this blow would have taken away half of his life. Tang En's eyes turned cold. He dragged the middle-aged man and took a step forward. He lifted his foot and kicked the ambusher in the stomach. With a cry of pain, the spear fell from the man's hand. Tang En kicked and pushed. Puff! The spear pierced the man's throat and nailed him to the wall. I'm an expert when it comes to sneak attacks. You bang! Tang En lowered his right elbow and blocked the middle-aged man's backward elbow strike. Understood. Bloody Ray raised his left hand and clutched the man's throat tightly. Then, the dagger in his right hand jumped lightly and fell. It easily penetrated the battle energy armor and went straight for the middle-aged man's thigh. Is that so? The middle-aged man's body trembled violently as he howled. Do you understand? It was unknown whether this sarcastic remark was directed at the dead ambusher or the middle-aged man who had taken advantage of the situation to attack. But no matter what, the noisy soldiers at the side were completely silent. Just now, he had killed so cleanly in the blink of an eye. This had shocked some of the people who were ready to make a move. Now we can talk calmly. Tang En leaned on the spear and said in a relaxed tone, How do you want to bang? Before he could finish his sentence, the soldier arched his back and slammed into the wall before collapsing to the ground. It's important to know one's own limits, brother. Tang En slowly retracted his foot. Can you find someone who's important enough to talk to me? Everyone back off. Fu Lake walked up from behind and waved his hand. No. With a muffled scream, the bloody dagger pierced through the middle-aged man's cheek and came out from the other side. I didn't say I wanted to talk to you, so you'd better keep quiet. Blood spurted out as Tang En pulled out the dagger. Hoo-a-woo. Because air was leaking out from both sides, the subsequent screams sounded strange. The soldiers usually followed the middle-aged man, so now they seemed to be a little hesitant. Are you rebelling? Fu Lake glared at them and said fiercely, Don't forget, your families are still on the territory of the Lord. The soldiers looked at each other. After hearing Fu Lake's last sentence, they couldn't help but move to his side. Fu Lake snorted and looked at the middle-aged man's miserable state. A trace of satisfaction flashed in his eyes, and he spread his hands. What's there to talk about between us? Tang En smiled. Talk to make you surrender. You're kidding. Don't think you can use him to threaten us. Fu Lake rejected without thinking. I know you're strong, but don't forget that we outnumber you by 3 times. At worst, we'll all die together. There's no way out now anyway. Tang In smiled and shook his head. Haha, who said there's no way out? Huh? You, what did you say? Fu Lake's eyes widened and he stuttered. There's no way out? After calming himself down, he quickly looked at Fu Lake and said, Is the rock a lie? That's true. Don't have any thoughts you shouldn't have, or there's really no way out. Tang In's ability to read people's expressions was top-notch. Seeing Fu Lake's expression, he guessed that he was going to command the soldiers to rush over. After a pause, Tang In continued, There's no proof. The rock is not far from the turn. You can go take a look. All right. Fu Lake knew how to take advantage of the situation. He immediately agreed and walked forward. He was not afraid of Tang In playing any tricks. Even if he was caught, there were other mine executives. Fu Lake's men quickly opened up a path for Fu Lake to pass. Fu Lake's heart sank as he looked at the 30 men on his side. He only had 70 or 80 soldiers that could be used. According to the situation just now, it was not enough to form an advantage. However, as he was not familiar with fighting, he did not see the injuries that the people were hiding, nor the 10 or so injured people who were stuck in the middle. The rock was not far behind. After a few minutes, Fu Lake walked back with a gloomy face. Where's the way out, you said? Of course I can't tell you now. I'll show you a professional. Tang In smiled and gave Fu Lake a look. On the other side, Old Bill walked out from behind the crowd and bowed. Mine owner. You're Old Bill. Fu Lake squinted and tried to identify him. Old Bill had been in this mine for more than 10 years and had trained so many miners. Even if he was familiar with his face, he would still have some influence. So, do you believe me now? Without our method, you'll be trapped here no matter how many of you there are. If you want to live, you have no choice. Tang In took the opportunity to say, If we fight with our lives, you have no way out either. Not necessarily. We will win, but we will lose some of our comrades. Tang In sounded very confident. Then he said lazily, And even if we don't have a way out, we will just die together. If there was a way out, who would want to die with you lowly people? Fu Lake frowned and struggled internally. On one hand, he had a strong desire to live. On the other hand, he was worried about being deceived. After a moment of hesitation, he said, We need to discuss. No problem. Tang In waved his hand, indicating that they could do as they pleased. In fact, this was exactly what he wanted. It would be strange if those fat mine executives didn't care about their lives. Listen. The middle-aged man seemed to be trying hard to say something. Of course, Fu Lake did not care about this. He turned around and walked to the back, whispering to the mine executives. Tang In curled his lips and leaned over to the middle-aged man's ear. I know you saw something, but it's useless. They want to live, but they won't listen. TSK, what a pity. Well, I'll make a bet with you. Believe it or not, they will ask me to kill you later. The situation on Frey's side could not be hidden from the middle-aged man's eyes. In fact, if Frey did not want to live and insisted on fighting, they would not be able to win. Even if Twain went all out and used Ghost Body, he would be the only one who could survive. Not to mention whether he could survive the side effect of Ghost Body, he would not be able to dig the tunnel alone. In the end, he would still die here. The discussion on the other side had taken more than 10 minutes. Tang was not feeling well. His back was leaning against the spear for support. Of course, he still looked calm on the surface. Fortunately, Fu Lake and the others finally came to a conclusion. He walked out and said, We surrender. Very good. Trust me. You've made a wise decision, Tang In said seriously. Fu Lake's eyes flashed. But we have one more condition. That is, Tang In curled his lips and waved his hand. Don't be in a hurry to tell me the condition. I can roughly guess. Well, send the soldiers' weapons and armor over first. Fu Lake paused and waved at the soldiers. Didn't you hear? Send the weapons over. Well, no. Bang. The middle-aged man's head was hit hard. He lowered his head weakly. Tang In raised his dagger. You guys continue. You guys continue. The soldiers looked at each other hesitantly. Once they handed over their weapons and armor, They would be lambs waiting to be slaughtered. But everyone wanted to live, didn't you hear? Hand it over. Don't you want to see your loved ones? That's why I'm afraid of traitors. Tangan looked at the anxious Fulake and sighed in his heart. Finally, the first soldier walked out. He threw his weapon on the ground and took off his armor. Then there was the second one. Soon a small mountain was piled up there. His blood ray waved his dagger. Plop! The middle-aged man's corpse fell to the ground. His eyes were wide open, as if he died with a grievance. Tangan spread his hands at Fulake and grinned. As you wish. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 201. If there was a chance to live, who would want to die? Folek and his men could not solve the problem of the rocks, and could not think of a way to get out of this predicament, so the outcome of surrendering was predictable. Of course, if the leader of this group of people was the middle-aged man, he might have considered fighting to the death, and then capturing Bill to force the solution out of him. Unfortunately, he was unlucky and exposed his strong position early on. Tangan's original target was Folek, but he changed his mind and took action to restrain him. When the two sides reached an agreement, whether it was for the safety of Tang-In and his men or for the safety of Folek and his men, the middle-aged man would definitely die. Although the safety issue was temporarily resolved, the matter was not over so easily. Tang-In's side only had about 20 people who could fight, so it was naturally difficult to manage more than 70 soldiers. It was not impossible to kill these people, but it would be a pity. No one knew what they would face next, so it was better to have more people to dig the tunnel. Finally, Fry removed the plate armor and removed the thick threads and chains to tie them up. Since these soldiers had already surrendered, they naturally wouldn't refuse such treatment. After this was done, everyone walked out one by one. Folek and the other mine executives were not tied up, and now they were nervously looking at Tang-Un and his men. Their faces were filled with annoyance when they saw that the people on the other side were covered in injuries and were being carried out with heavy injuries. But when they saw that Tang-In and his men had no intention of killing, they were relieved. We decided to dig from here to the other mine. Tang-In told Folek and his men about their previous plan. Folek was depressed when he heard this. Why didn't he think of this method before? But he quickly changed his mind because without Bill's words, even if they thought of this method, they would not know where to start. You ordered the other end of the mine to be sealed. I want to know the situation there. After explaining the escape plan, Tang-In asked the key question. We sent soldiers to bury the place with sand and built an iron gate. Okay. Tang-In and Fry looked at each other and nodded. It seemed that their goal now was to dig to the iron gate. No matter how the terrain changed, as long as they found the iron gate, they wouldn't be far from the surface. Can I ask you a question? Fulek asked carefully. Sure. Actually, you don't have to tell us the method. Even if you want to know the situation over there, you could just ask directly. Tang-In glanced at Frake with a half-smile. I'm telling you guys so that you guys won't have any unpleasant thoughts. Of course, there's another reason. Tang-In paused and handed them a broken blade. Take it. There's no sir here. If you want to get out as soon as possible, you'll have to do it yourself. Fulake was dumbfounded. We have to dig too. Of course. Tang-In glared at them. We only dig a tunnel that normal people can pass through. With your tonnage, TSK. Folek and the others looked at their fat bodies because of their pampered lifestyle and wanted to cry, but no tears came out. At this time, Old Bill had already confirmed the location of the dig. Tang-In and the rest untied half of the soldiers and handed them half of their battle swords. The blades were thin at the top and thick at the bottom. The front was the blade and the back was the heavy blade. After cutting it in half, the sharpness was reduced and it wouldn't affect the digging. With these laborers, Tang-In and the others naturally didn't have to do it themselves. This wasn't just for the sake of relaxing. No one knew how long they would have to stay here, and there would definitely be no food. In this way, the less activity they had, the less energy they would consume. Even if these soldiers starved to death, they would still have the energy to dig forward again. The tunnel that they had dug through was at the bottom of the mountain. Although there were stone walls here, most of it was mud. So now they were digging faster and it wasn't too strenuous. If it was in the middle of the mountain, Tang In and the others could only wait for death. "Brother Fry, how is it? Are there any problems?" Tang In walked to the entrance of the tunnel and asked. Fry organized a group of people who were not injured or had minor injuries to be the supervisors. Although these soldiers had surrendered now, there was no guarantee that they wouldn't cause trouble for various reasons in the future. "Haha, no problem." Fry laughed and pointed at the excited crowd. "It's just that this feeling is a little strange. We used to be miners and they monitored us. Who knew that the world would change, and today it's our turn to monitor them." "Ha! Ha, yes." Tang In chuckled and continued. "But there's something I need you to pay attention to. We used to be miners and were beaten and scolded. Originally, it's understandable for them to retaliate. But now the situation is a little special. If there's too much beating and scolding, it might cause some problems. This was a problem that had to be considered. No matter which world it was, once a person had power, even if it was a small power, it might transfer the suffering they had gone through. Now Tang In and the others were in adversity and needed the help of these soldiers. If they were forced to resist or not work hard because of these reasons, then the loss would outweigh the gain. After Fry heard Tang In's words, the smile on his face gradually disappeared. Finally, he nodded solemnly and said, "Brother Arthur is right. I'll remind everyone later." "Haha, it's not that serious. Brother Fry, you can just mention it casually. It'll only take a few days at most. Everyone won't be like that." "Haha, good." After saying these things, Tang In smiled and waved at Fry. Then he looked around and wanted to find a place to rest. His injuries had worsened a little because of the recent fierce battles. Tang In suddenly frowned and walked to the place where the wounded were resting. David's arm was wrapped in a thick gray cloth, and he looked dazed. This was inconsistent with his usual carefree character. David, "Oh, boss, what's wrong?" David came back to his senses and looked up at Tang In standing in front of him. He looked a little flustered. Tang In raised his eyebrows. "Oh, it's nothing. I want to ask how your injuries are." "This, no problem." Thump, thump, David patted his chest and said proudly, "I was just bitten by a bug. My body is fine." "Your arm is injured. Why are you patting your chest?" Tang In shook his head and turned to sit beside him. "It's good that you're fine. Take the time to rest. Later, we'll monitor the tied-up soldiers." "Okay." David nodded, then grabbed his hair and said hesitantly, "Boss, I have something." "Well, I don't understand." "Oh, let's hear it." To be honest, Tang In was a little curious. What could make David, who had always been bold, unable to let it go? Actually, there's nothing much to say. Well, it's just that when we were fighting in front of the mine, I killed those miners. It's not that I don't dare to kill. I've killed a lot before. But I don't know why, but killing those people made me feel a little uncomfortable. Well, it's not uncomfortable, it's just like a little lump. It's a little different from what Leader Luo Sha said, but I asked me Sho, and he didn't have much of this feeling. "Boss, is it wrong of me to do this?" "This." Tang In opened his mouth, and his expression was a little complicated. Of course, he knew about David's feelings. He could kill his enemies without hesitation, but he couldn't do it to those who had unclear relations with them, or even those who were innocent. In fact, David was much more promising than him. When he first came to the other world, he heard that the system wanted to kill the priest, and he felt a little disgusted. Well, this is not wrong. Everyone has their own position. Under the circumstances, they were right, and you were not bad. But everyone only has one life. We are not gods, so it doesn't matter if we die, so we can't accommodate each other. Well, you can say sorry to their corpses after the fact. "Oh," David nodded and said thoughtfully, "I understand. Just like you said before, everyone only has one life, so we have to be selfish, right?" That's more or less what I mean." Tang In rubbed his nose. "Understood." David stood up and laughed self-deprecatingly. "Since we're all selfish, then I feel much better. Well then, boss, I'll go monitor the soldiers over there." "Okay, go." Tang In smiled and nodded. Shaking his head, David's question made Tang and feel a little emotional. He was the same at that time, but when did he stop thinking about these things? Well, it's probably because he's killed too many people. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 202. The setting sun was as red as blood, and the frosty wind was mournful. The northern climate was relentlessly displaying its cruelty to the people. However, when it descended upon the flat valleys of the 100,000 mountains in the west, it encountered an even crueler opponent. War. The yellowish earth changed color, and the dark red new clothes were particularly bright. Black smoke rose from the broken flag, and the sky seemed to be dyed gray. The stiff corpses maintained their ferocious faces when they were alive, but their wide open mouths could no longer make any sounds. Only the broken swords beside them hummed softly in the cold wind. Goo-goo. Soon, this solemn environment was broken by a few long bugles. Then, it was shattered by a series of neat footsteps. The black mass of soldiers walked over the corpses on the ground and gathered in front. When they reached a point, they suddenly quickened their pace. Kill! 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 The earth-shattering battle cries resounded through the world. Under the leadership of each squad leader, the soldiers jumped into the circular pit in front of them without hesitation. Then, in the crisscrossing pit that spread endlessly, soldiers with weapons raised high appeared. Both sides were entangled with each other in the shouting. Suddenly, the wide battle line became a feast for the Grim Reaper. Every minute, every second, there were soldiers falling. However, there were even more people who continued to charge and slash at the enemy. A soldier roared and stabbed his sword into the chest of his opponent, but before he could pull it out, his heart was stabbed by a long spear that came out from the side. Another soldier pressed his opponent to the ground, and then raised his sword to stab down, but his head was cut off by a passing sword. The spurting blood covered the setting sun, and the scattered limbs flew in the air. What a scene of carnage! Although it was still a stalemate, it was obvious that the attacking side had the upper hand. Because their weapons were better, their armor was sturdier, and their fighting skills were more effective. The soldiers on the other side seemed to know the characteristics of the other side, so they only entangled with the other side in the tunnel, trying their best to limit the space for the other side to perform. The number of casualties in the beginning of the charge kept jumping, but in the later stage of the stalemate, when the blood faded, the casualties gradually calmed down. At this time, the soldiers on both sides chose to fight. If they did not have absolute confidence, or if they were outnumbered, they would not take the risk to fight. This was not cowardice, this was skill. There were no cowards on the battlefield because most of them were already lying on the ground. Of course, it wasn't good to be too courageous because this kind of person would often rely on their individual bravery to go deep into enemy territory alone. In the end, they would only die with regret under the group beating. How to quickly gather people to encircle and annihilate the enemy. How to exchange a slight injury for a fatal attack in a head-on battle. This kind of fighting technique was really something that only veterans on the battlefield would be able to do. Although the attacking side had the advantage, it was obvious that this advantage was not enough to turn into victory. Therefore, after 3 hours of fighting, they began to retreat after a few more bugles. War was, after all, a contest between men. If it wasn't the final battle, when both sides were exhausted, they could only withdraw their troops and wait for the next battle. Of course, it wasn't as if the attacking side didn't achieve anything in this battle. The pit that they occupied had already been buried by the soldiers who followed behind them with shovels. Obviously, their commander knew that the situation was unfavorable for them. The defending soldiers didn't make any moves to attack because the other party was retreating, not retreating. If they rashly chased after them, not only would they not be able to gain the upper hand, they would also suffer a great loss. In a short 3 hours, the valley returned to its peaceful state, leaving only more and more corpses and floating souls. At the rear of the attacking soldiers' retreat in the main tent, the curtain was violently flung open, and a general with a gloomy face walked in. Without saying anything, He picked up the water bottle on the table and gulped down a mouthful of water. Then, a burly general walked in helplessly. Behind him was an expressionless middle-aged man. Looking at his military rank, he was also a general. General Gary, General Ralph, how are things on your side? The burly general sat down and asked. How else could it be? Gary wiped the water from his mouth and angrily threw away the water bottle. I've never fought such a useless battle in my life. Damn, compared to them, those barbarians in the northern wilderness are much more pleasing to the eye. Layer Fu shook his head and said, strategy is amazing. Without a doubt, these three people were the main generals sent by Zichin, Thunder, and the Ashen Flame Army to encircle and eliminate the Grey Coat Army. Previously, they had successfully trapped the soldiers of the four feudal lords in front of the Grey Coat Army, and then led the soldiers to rush over from behind. Originally, they had thought that there would be no problem in taking down the Grey Coat Army in a head-on battle. However, who would have thought that when they arrived, they would see the enemy digging holes all over the mountains and plains? The following situation was just like the previous battle. They had the advantage, but they could not open the door to victory. The reason was simple. The army was best at setting up formations and attacking head-on. However, those holes and tunnels messed up their attack formation, and they could not display the absolute advantage that they should have. After attacking for 2 to 3 days, the most obvious result was that they had filled up a hole that was more than 10 kilometers wide. Wasn't this nonsense? This won't do. Baylor sighed. Although we are constantly attacking here, those useless feudal lord soldiers won't be able to hold on for long. If this continues, a portion of them will have to break through. Then what do you think we should do? Gary slammed his helmet heavily on the table. The Grey Coat Army strategy is clearly to stall us. F***, luck is not on our side. Yesterday, we finally managed to persuade the Lord's soldiers to cooperate with us for a surprise attack. Just as we were about to succeed, an earthquake struck us. F***. When Baylor heard this, his face was filled with helplessness. What can I do? The Grey Coat Army has seen through us. We have been fighting with the barbarians in the northern wilderness for many years, and we're used to attacking openly. Now that we have encountered these tactics, this is a strategic defeat. Speaking up to this point, Baylor shook his head and looked to the right. I wonder if General Ralph has any other plans? Sigh, if your previous plan had not encountered an earthquake, it would have succeeded. Ralph furrowed his brows. No, just attack like this. Just attack like this. Baylor widened his eyes. Yes. Ralph nodded. Just defeat them. The real enemy is not them. It had to be said that after staying with Silent Eagle for a long time, one's ability to understand things had improved. At this moment, Baylor understood what Ralph meant. He wanted to make use of the remaining time to continuously attack and try his best to destroy the strength of the Grey Coat Army. They did not want to be killed, but they wanted to be hurt. After all, their original intention was to ensure the stability of the rear before the real enemy, the northern wilderness tribes, attacked. However, they had been very confident previously. They wanted to completely destroy the enemy and finish the job once and for all. Now, it was obvious that they could not do so. They could only hope that the enemy would be chased far away and not dare to invade. I can't accept this. Baylor did not finish his sentence. Of course, he could not accept this, but the most important thing was that he had lost face. Could it be that this time, the three large armies had mobilized so many people, but the outcome would be the same as the previous times? When he returned, he would be mocked to death by his colleagues. Ralph and Gary naturally understood what Baylor meant. However, they had no choice now. They could only do this. Then let's do this. After all, he was someone who had been on the battlefield for a long time. After understanding that this matter was impossible, Baylor quickly made a decision. Whoosh! At this moment, the curtains of the central tent were pulled open. A person who looked like a scout walked in. The reason why he said that he looked like a scout was because he had much more equipment than the brand standard scouts. Baylor and Gary's eyes moved. They naturally recognized this scout. This was unique to the Zichin Legion. His combat power was above that of all the scouts in the other armies. General, The scout bowed and said, "We encountered close to 1,000 soldiers from the military armament department at the back of the army." Military armament department? Baylor revealed a stunned expression. What are they doing here? They said that they were chasing after a group of gray coat army that burned their rations. Ah, Ralph, Baylor, and Gary all opened their mouths wide. They revealed a stunned expression. Burned their rations. Gary knocked his head. His expression was gloomy. This happened more than 10 days ago. 14 days. Ralph's expression returned to normal. TSK, 14 days. Baylor smacked his lips and sighed softly. Then, the veins on his forehead bulged. His face instantly turned red. Let this bunch of trash die. Die, die, die. Thunder-like voice spread out of the tent and out of the camp. It kept circling in the sky above the valley. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 203. When the three large armies finally recognized their current situation and lowered their expectations, what followed was an endless attack. No matter what, the three large armies were still stronger than the Gray Coat Army in terms of individual quality. What Baylor and the rest needed to do now was to eliminate as many Gray Coat Army soldiers as possible in the remaining time. This would also achieve their desired goal. Just as the soldiers from both sides were engaged in an intense battle, Tang Yin and the rest were also working hard on the field mouse's work. The mine was very tall, and it was difficult to climb over it. At the same time, its surface area was also very wide. If one walked normally beside it, it would take at least half a day to cross it. As for digging, well, it would take about 3 days. Take note, this was under the condition that everything went smoothly. If there were too many parts to dig, it would be hard to say. Tang Yin and the rest were not very lucky. After successfully digging a hole and going around the rock, they suddenly realized that there was no road ahead. Of course, this was not a problem with Old Bill leading the way. It was because this section had collapsed. Under such circumstances, taking a detour would only be a waste of time. They could only grit their teeth and open up a tunnel. Of course, they would encounter stones, minerals, and other hard objects. Tang Yin and the rest would move them if they could. If they could not move them, they would use their fighting energy to forcefully break them. Of course, if they were unlucky enough to encounter something like a rock, then the few hours of hard work would be completely wasted. They could only open up another tunnel. In this process of digging and stopping, Tang Yin and the rest stayed underground for about 2 days. At this time, they also began to face the biggest test, the problem of food. The underground was not like other places. There was almost no way to obtain food. Only when they were lucky would they be able to find some broken plant roots in the process of digging the tunnel. This was the only lunch they had every day. Of course, after dividing it into 100 portions, there was almost nothing. If a person did not eat for a long time, the twitching and burning sensation in their body would drive them crazy. Under such circumstances, people could not be considered rational. Some soldiers began to devour soil and glass stones. Of course, this thing was not food, but it could give people the illusion that they were full. Of course, the consequences of this were predictable. Some of the soldiers started vomiting, running fevers, and losing the ability to move. At this point, everyone could not even take care of themselves, so these sick people could only be abandoned here. At this point, hunger wasn't the only thing that was caused by food. Some people with weak minds would lose their will to live. They would lie on the ground like dead dogs, and no matter how much they were beaten or scolded, they would not get up. Or they might even go crazy and try to snatch the saber and kill people. As for the latter, Tang Yin's methods were extremely cruel. He directly tied the other party up and instilled his blood energy into him. Then, he called for everyone to listen to his incessant howls and wails. The fear of death overwhelmed everything. The only thing more terrifying than death was not being able to die, even if you wanted to. Those who were unwilling to work all shivered and got up from the ground. You can choose to die, but don't think about dying peacefully, Tang Yin said. In this situation, he would not allow anything that would cause chaos to happen. The screams echoed in the passage and tunnel. When they were far away from here, they seemed to be echoing in their ears. This trick really scared everyone, and the situation temporarily returned to normal. But on the afternoon of the third day, something happened again. Boss, it seems that a soldier is missing. Michaud frowned and came over. He was the luckiest member of the gray space. After more than 10 days of chasing and killing, he had almost no injuries. Therefore, at this time, he also took on the task of monitoring the soldiers. One is missing? Tang In asked in surprise. Yes, I felt it this morning, but I was digging the tunnel at the time, so I didn't confirm it. Later at lunch, I counted, and there was indeed one missing. Michaud said with certainty. Dunn nodded, then narrowed his eyes and said, Gather everyone. Yes. In the narrow passage, all the sallow and emaciated soldiers were crowded together, while Fry and the others were on guard around. Tang In glanced around. There were more than 70 soldiers who had been captured before. A few of them had died because of food, and he had killed one himself. There were about 60 left. With so many people, and in such a dim environment, it was not easy to notice that one or two of them were missing. Perhaps only Michaud, who was born with a delicate mind, could detect it. Tang In went straight to the point. One of you is missing. Can anyone tell me where he is now? The soldiers were silent. Oh, don't tell me you don't know. Tang In shrugged and curled his lips. You know each other before, and now you get along with each other day and night. Well, don't insult my intelligence. The soldiers looked at each other and still did not say a word. TSK, TSK. Tang In smacked his lips and stepped forward, glancing at everyone's eyes. Due to Tang In's previous ruthlessness, these soldiers did not dare to look at him. Almost all of them quickly lowered their heads after a glance. You. Tang In suddenly reached out and patted a soldier's shoulder as he said with a smile. There was fear in his eyes, which was different from having something on his mind. The soldier's body went soft after being patted by Tang In, and he almost fell. Be careful, stand still. Come, come. Tang In walked out with the soldier in his arms. I didn't do it. I didn't do it. The soldier panicked. Oh, very good. That means he's not missing or running away. Tang In nodded in understanding and continued. Then, who did it? Where's he now? The soldier knew that he had said something wrong, and his face was even paler. He shook his head and trembled. Well, although I am embarrassed to admit it, my interrogation skills are really good. Do you want to see it? The soldier shook his head more diligently, and his mouth was mumbling something. Louder! Tang In suddenly shouted. It's the captain. The soldier quivered and blurted out. Then his mouth was wide open, and his face was full of frustration. Well, very good, very good. Tang In patted the soldier and praised him with a smile. Then he looked up at the crowd. So, who's the captain? Following the gaze of several people, Tang In quickly locked onto the target. It was a strong man with a strong body. Although his eyes were sunken due to hunger these days, it could be seen that he was still in good spirits. Seeing Tang In's gaze fixed on him, the strong man's eyes drifted. He turned his head and snorted, pushing away the soldiers in front of him, and strode out. Well, your courage is commendable. That's right. Tang In nodded, and then said, You will tell me where that person is, right? The strong man ignored Tang In, but turned his head and shouted, What are you waiting for? Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. 10 or so men with the strongest physiques walked out upon hearing the voice. Their faces were filled with malevolence. Fry and the others immediately surrounded them nervously. Tang In waved his hand, stopping them. He looked up and narrowed his eyes at the strong man. To be honest, I was just guessing before, but now I'm sure. Hee, I can't believe you did it. Well, I'm still a little curious. What's the reason for you doing this? Can you get out alive? The strong man curled his lips in disdain. According to your method, of course not. But my method will definitely work. Haha, that's true. Tang In thought for a moment, and then nodded. You may be able to get out by doing this, but only a dozen or so of you. Maybe less. David and the others looked at each other, a little confused. Fry and Titan seemed to understand something, and their faces changed slightly. Haha, you don't need to sow discord. The strong man looked up and laughed. As long as we have the 30 of you as food, It's definitely enough for us to get out. A food, we're food? Hiss! David and the others suddenly understood, and then they sucked in a breath of cold air, their stomachs churning. They really had nothing to vomit, or else they would have vomited. The remaining soldiers seemed to be unaware of the situation. After they understood what the strong man said, they couldn't help but take a few big steps back, their faces full of bitterness. Wah! Finally, someone couldn't take it anymore and began to vomit acid. That was Fry and the other mine executives. They had been pampered for so many years, and perhaps they had heard of cannibalism, but when it really happened, they still couldn't take it. It's not as simple as you think. Forget it. You won't understand, even if I tell you. Tangan raised his eyebrows and continued. Anyway, are you trying to rebel now? That's right. The strong man laughed. You haven't eaten for a few days. Your limbs must be weak. How are you going to fight us? Speaking of this, the strong man turned to the soldiers. Brothers, follow me and rebel. As long as we eat them, we can definitely dig our way out. The soldiers looked at each other. Their eyes were a little complicated, and for a moment, no one responded. They hated Tang In and the others, but relatively speaking, the captain who would eat his own people seemed even more unreliable. Hey, are you that confident? Tang In touched his nose. Haven't you heard that a starving camel is still bigger than a horse? This was a modern saying. The strong man naturally didn't know. Tang In shook his head helplessly. Sigh. It's terrible to be uneducated. After that, his body flashed twice like a ghost, ignoring the distance between them, and directly in front of the strong man. Do it. The strong man was shocked, and after shouting, he swung his right arm, and a cold light slashed towards Tangan's chest. It was half a battle sword, but the thick body of the sword had been sharpened, and it looked like a dagger. However, before this half of the sword was handed out, the strong man felt a pain in his hand, and then the front of his shirt was grabbed, and his body was thrown into the air. Bang! Bang! First, he smashed into the wall of the passage, and then fell heavily to the ground. The strong man was dizzy for a moment, and he couldn't come back to his senses. Tang and picked up the half of the battle sword and looked at it, then took a few steps forward and leaned in front of him. Don't think that you could be arrogant just because you ate some meat. Don't you know that others will be jealous? Huh. The half of the battle sword was raised, and a string of blood beads appeared. To be continued. If you like this work, you're welcome to come a Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 204. Hunger and thirst were two different things. Eating people and drinking urine were also two different things. When a person was trapped underground and had no other choice, he might drink urine to quench his thirst, but eating people to quench his hunger. Well, the taste was too strong. Normal people would not do this. Of course, from a practical point of view, human flesh was also meat and could quench hunger. But as Tangan said before, things were not that simple. You could not eat your own meat. This thing could not be recycled. The more you ate, the less you ate. So, you could only look at other people. Similarly, other people would also look at you. Once this magic box was opened, people would inevitably be full of vigilance. So if this went on, who would still dig the tunnel? After all, no one knew if the people behind would stab you and then drag you out to eat you while you were digging in front. If this matter was to succeed, perhaps only a person with authority could stand up and treat the enemy as prey. This way, it could be controlled in a short period of time. In this mine, Tang In and Fry could do this. This was because they both had their own hardcore team. Their friendship with each other could maintain trust for a period of time. As for the strong man who was killed, he obviously did not have this. If he was allowed to do so, he would only end up eating people continuously. In the end, only 2 people were left. Then, they would kill each other, eat people, and finally die. The sudden resistance of this group of people took a lot of effort from Tang In and the others. The burly man was right about one thing. They were indeed weak and powerless due to hunger. But this weakness was not to the extent that they had no power. After Fry and the others exerted their fighting energy, they finally captured the remaining dozen people. From this point of view, if Tang In and the others did not notice that there were fewer people and did not leave the underground. Then, in a few days, these strong men might really succeed in their resistance. For the dozen people who were captured, Tang In did not hesitate to propose to kill them. He would rather have fewer people digging the tunnel than to open this hole. Well, at the very least, he couldn't open it now. Otherwise, if he let them hang around in front of other people, it was hard to guarantee that people wouldn't have the idea that eating humans is no big deal in their hearts. Fry also agreed with Tang In's proposal. Once the two of them expressed their stance, the fate of the dozen or so people was decided. In the end, Tang In and the others decided to execute these people in front of the soldiers. No one panicked. Some even applauded and cheered. After all, eating humans was a challenge to their psychological bottom line. After settling this matter, the soldiers' attitude towards Tang In and the others changed a little. Even though there was still no food and there was still no end to the darkness, there was no more destruction when they dug the tunnel. Firstly, it was because Tang In and the others had handled this matter well. Secondly, everyone was now working hard to survive. Compared to this, hatred and whatnot were secondary. What happened next was an interlude. One of the soldiers was lucky enough to dig out a large handful of non-poisonous fungus plants. Logically speaking, this should be handed over to the higher-ups for distribution. However, the soldier next to him was really greedy and couldn't help but fight for it. The two fought in the tunnel for a while. After both of them were dragged out, Tang In asked about the situation and then punished the soldier who fought for it. Then, he publicly praised the soldier who dug out the fungus and announced that he would be rewarded with an extra piece of food in the distribution of lunch. Such a fair treatment undoubtedly won praise. At the same time, the soldiers also noticed it. Although they were the only ones digging the tunnel, Tang In and the others were easily monitoring from the side. However, in the distribution of food, everyone except Old Bill was given equal shares. This was not easy, especially under such circumstances. One must know that when they were monitoring the miners before, the difference in food between the two sides was like heaven and earth. Not only that, but Tang In and the others who were monitoring them also rarely beat or scolded them. One must know that when they were supervisors before, they were not polite to the miners. It was common for them to find a reason to whip those who were not pleasing to the eye or were in a bad mood. As the saying goes, a friend in need is a friend indeed. Gradually, some of the soldiers began to have simple conversations with Tang In and the others when they were resting. After all, this place was only so big and the atmosphere was so dull. If they did not say anything, they would feel suffocated. Tang In was naturally happy to see this happen. He was not someone who took the initiative to liven up the atmosphere. It was not that he could not do it. The assassin training in the system space allowed him to disguise as all kinds of people, including their personalities. It was just that this had always been his primitive habit, so he was too lazy to do it. Just like when Darren led the Gray Coat Army in the jungle and was being hunted down, the one who came out to encourage everyone was Josiah, not him. But now that these soldiers took the initiative to talk, he went along with it and chatted with them. He was a man after all, picking a few dirty jokes from the later generations and slightly adapting them would make them laugh without words. In the end, everyone simply gathered around and listened to Tang In, who was sitting in the middle, talk nonsense with great interest. Fry and the others were stunned at first. Later on, they could not help but sit over and listen with the soldiers. Then, they began to exchange their experiences as men. As the atmosphere became more lively, a miner with shackles and a soldier even began to argue about who had the best skills in bed. In the end, the two of them went to a secluded place and began to compete with who had the longest. Under such an atmosphere, the tunnel project gradually progressed. Old Bill's ability to recognize the path was top-notch. Even when they encounter a landslide, the excavation route he pointed out was never wrong. This undoubtedly strengthened everyone's confidence that they could get out. After all, they had always been on the right path. As long as they worked hard enough, there would be a day when they could get out. The passage of time in the cave was unknown. Unknowingly, everyone had stayed underground for 5 whole days. Most of the soldiers began to feel exhausted and hallucinate. After all, no matter how strong their mental strength was, they could not take it when they only had a small amount of food every day. Tang Yin and the others were slightly better. After all, they had not exercised much all this time. Later on, even the number of people monitoring them decreased. It was not that they trusted the soldiers, but these soldiers no longer needed to be monitored. Even if they were handed a knife, they would not be able to hold it. After that, Tang In and the others took over the simple tools from the soldiers and began to dig in front. After digging for half a day, Old Bill suddenly called for them to stop. At this moment, Old Bill's expression was somewhat agitated. His face was abnormally red. After forcefully chasing everyone away, he picked up half of his knife and dug in front. His abnormal actions naturally attracted everyone's attention. Everyone knew what this meant. Even the soldiers who were on the verge of death slowly crawled over and quietly watched Old Bill's actions. One shovel, another shovel. At this moment, Tang Yin frowned. He was worried about Old Bill's current state. His state was obviously not normal. It was as if he was experiencing terminal lucidity. Although he had consciously let Old Bill eat more food every time, how much could he eat? Moreover, due to his age and mental strength, his body was actually the worst out of everyone. Just as Tang Yin was thinking about this situation, suddenly ding, really the sound of metal colliding was very soft. It was so soft that it was like an insignificant gust of wind. However, in everyone's ears, this sound was very loud. It was so loud that it was louder than the church bell that they had heard before. Old Bill threw away half of his knife. His hands trembled as he dug a few times. A metal rod appeared in front of everyone's eyes. It was the metal rod from the metal gate. Haha, found it, I found it. Although Tang Un and the others could not see Old Bill's expression, they could still feel his uncontrollable joy from his trembling shoulders. Then, without waiting for everyone to cheer, his trembling shoulders slowly calmed down. He leaned forward and fell down with a loud bang. Old Bill, if you like this work, you're welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 205. Old Bill. With a flash of his body, Tang In staggered and covered a distance of several feet in an instant. He bent down and supported Old Bill's body. At this moment, Old Bill's wrinkled face was full of smiles. Unfortunately, this smile had been frozen forever. Tang In reached out and touched Old Bill's nose and neck. The surrounding people gathered around and watched his actions nervously. Tang In's face was gloomy. After a long time, he gently shook his head. Old Bill's previous actions had exhausted the last bit of energy in his body. Everyone was silent. At this moment, even the soldiers' faces were full of grief. From the moment they entered the mine, this team could have lacked anyone but Old Bill. Otherwise, they would not have had any chance of survival. But now, just as they were about to see the light, their greatest hero had fallen. He let out a long sigh. Tang In's expression suddenly changed. Old Bill's right hand was slightly inserted into his waist pocket, as if he wanted to take something out. Tang In reached into the pocket and touched a large metal disc. He took it out and opened it. His palm was filled with scattered coins. There were gold and silver coins, but of course, most of them were copper coins. Nodding his head, Tang In quickly understood Old Bill's intention. He softly said, "Don't worry, I will send this money to you. Does anyone know Old Bill's address?" "Boss, I know." David's eyes reddened as he raised his hand. "Old Bill and I have talked before. His family is in Shea Village. His family only has a daughter-in-law and a granddaughter, so he came out to mine to earn money. He often said that his daughter-in-law is filial and his granddaughter is obedient." Old Bill's body was finally buried under the metal door. He had mined for his whole life. Thinking about it, he would like to be buried here. The dead are gone, and the living seek to live. After sorting out their emotions, everyone continued their journey of digging. Because they had already found the metal door, they only needed to dig diagonally upwards to get out. This time, it was a true collective effort. Even the exhausted soldiers were full of energy at this time. They waved the broken swords in their hands with all their might. It really made people wonder if they were faking it before. In their last struggle, the soil became looser and looser. Gradually, quicksand began to appear. This was the sand that Fulake had sent soldiers to fill in to seal the passage. Seeing this, everyone became even more excited. They immediately put more strength into their hands and roared as they waved their hands rapidly. Dig, 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 shovel, 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 ding. Ding, ding. The sparks were dazzling, and dozens of collisions rang out at the same time. Everyone involuntarily stopped what they were doing and stared blankly at the large green rock that suddenly appeared in front of them. The atmosphere froze for a moment, and a feeling of despair rose in everyone's heart. They originally thought that they could break through the ground and directly reach the surface, but unexpectedly, they encountered a blue stone blocking their way. Could it be that they were still in the range of the mountain range? Could it be that all their previous efforts were in vain? This was an extremely dangerous time. The human heart had been ravaged by the past few days and was extremely fragile. He could no longer tolerate even a little setback. Not to mention this kind of situation where they saw hope and then met with despair. F***CK, what are you waiting for? Split it open. Tang In roared decisively. It was unrealistic to change the route now. After losing Bill, they had no confidence in determining the route. Besides, everyone was depressed now. They needed to immediately have a target to focus their attention on. Even if it was just a target to vent their frustrations, it would be good. Roar! David, who was at the front, roared and tried his best to activate the fighting energy around him. Yellow light flowed around his fists and directly imprinted on the rock. Boom! The huge rock was sent flying. I'll do it again. Ugh! Everyone was petrified. Some opened their mouths wide, some rolled up their sleeves and prepared to punch. To be honest, David's punch was very weak. Due to the exhaustion of his physical strength, it was difficult to use his fighting energy. Hence, it was almost at the level of a novice warrior. But who would have thought that such a weak punch would be able to directly blow away the huge rock that had dragged everyone into this desperate situation? In an instant, a ray of light shot into the cave, and the dust inside floated. The few people at the entrance of the cave couldn't help but cover their eyes. Of course, the light from the pale white winter sun wasn't that dazzling, but everyone had been living in the dark underground, and the only source of light was the flickering glass stones. So now, they felt that the light was very strong, very dazzling. Yes, it was dazzling. Wah! Roar! Huh! Woo! Everyone came back to their senses and immediately burst into cheers. They hugged each other, laughed towards the sky, covered their faces, and cried. There were all kinds of expressions. It had been 6 days. No, to be more precise, 6.5 days. They had finally dug out the tunnel with their perseverance and returned to the surface. At this moment, even the most reserved and introverted person couldn't help but celebrate crazily. When everyone climbed up to the surface, they realized that the huge rock that made them despair was just a random rock by the side of the mountain. Normally, they wouldn't even look at it when they passed by. Bang, bang, bang. It was unknown who made the first move, but then everyone couldn't help but follow suit. At this time, if someone passed by, they would find this very absurd scene. Nearly 100 people in ragged clothes, with yellow faces and skinny bodies, were kicking and punching a rock. They were also cursing as they hit it, as if the rock had some deep hatred with them. After venting their emotions, there was another burst of cheers. This time, it wasn't for escaping, but for the green bark and grass beside them. Everyone was like a tiger coming down the mountain. They rushed to the side of the road, grabbed the bark, pulled the leaves, and stuffed them into their mouths without looking at them. It wasn't that these things that could be seen everywhere were inedible, but normally, even vegetarians wouldn't eat them. Now, a group of people's eyes were green as they wolfed down the food, as if they had seen a delicious meal. In fact, to them, it was not an exaggeration to describe it as a delicious meal. This was indeed far more delicious than the rotten plant roots with soil. After their stomachs were filled with these things, their rationality began to gradually return. Suddenly, Everyone's eyes turned to Tang Un. Returning to the surface world not only meant that they could escape, it also meant that the people here would become enemies again. Of course, these soldiers were not willing to fight with Tang Un again. This was not only because they had weapons, but more importantly, this battle was not necessary at all. Of course, all of this depended on Tang Un's intentions. Fry and the others also looked at Tang Un, not to mention his own strength. Just based on his performance in the mine, Tang Un was the key person in this escape, second only to Old Bill. At this time, Tang Un slowly swallowed a leaf roll into his stomach. This battle was indeed not necessary, although they could definitely win if they fought. However, after escaping with great difficulty, he didn't want to drag the members of the gray space into danger again. After making up his mind, Tang Un waved at the soldiers. "Farewell. I won't send you off." HM. Amidst the bewildered voices, everyone shifted their gazes to the side. The place they had escaped from was an ordinary mountain path. Behind them was the once towering mountain that had collapsed, and the other three sides were low hills. Now, at the bend of the mountain path to their left, a large group of soldiers suddenly appeared. This was also because Tang Un and the others didn't have time to investigate the surrounding terrain. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been discovered at such a close distance. When the soldiers turned around and saw Tang Un and the others, they were also stunned on the spot. To call them soldiers, this group of people looked a little miserable, but to call them beggars, dozens of them held knives in their hands. "Boss, why do I feel that these people are a little familiar?" Luke stammered. "Really?" Tang Un glanced around. "TSK, this armor looks like I've seen it before." "It's them." Suddenly, a person rushed out from the soldiers and pointed at Tang Un. His tone and expression were excited, as if he had met an old friend in a foreign land. "This person," Tang Un opened his mouth, but was speechless. Tang Un really did know this person. When they had used the empty fort strategy on the hill back then, the other party seemed to be a squad leader. "That's right, they're the ones who burned the provisions. I recognize them too. They even left a message on the stone tablet mocking us. Brothers, kill them. F*CK, what a coincidence. I'm already in this state, and you still recognize me." Tang Un felt like 10,000 horses were galloping across his heart. Actually, the squad leader couldn't be blamed for having sharp eyes. It was just that the sentence he had left, after appraisal, "The person who destroyed the stone tablet is an idiot," was too hateful. The squad leader had become the target of ridicule wherever he went. So, even in his sleep, he was dreaming of the scene of him torturing Twain to death. As a result, Tang Un's face was firmly engraved in his heart. "Run!" Tang Un groaned in pain. He got up and ran without hesitation. "It's a misunderstanding. We're not with them. We're—" Just as Tang Un was telling David and the others to run, a few people in the crowd waved their arms and ran towards the soldiers. Looking at their fat bodies, it was Folek and a few of the mine's higher-ups. Perhaps it was because they were fat and had better resistance to hunger, but after a day of suffering underground, Folek and the others were more energetic than some of the soldiers. So now they were running at a rather fast speed. "Idiots! Idiots! No!" The one who called them idiots was Tang Un. The one who called them idiots was Fry and the others. As for the ones who said no, it was the mine soldiers. In fact, if Folek and the others stood still and raised their hands in surrender, they might have a chance to explain to the soldiers after Tang Un and the others ran away. But now a few people were rushing over, and in a situation where their relationship was unclear, whoosh, 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 sure enough, the enemy did not hesitate to shoot a rain of arrows, nailing Folek and the others to the hedgehog. Damn it, everyone run! Fry and the other soldiers were helpless. Now, they could only run behind Tang Un, otherwise they would be greeted with another rain of arrows. Tang Un took the time to look back and saw the pursuing soldiers coming out of the corner of the mountain in a row. There were probably close to 1,000 of them. F*CK, I'll be punished for my cheap mouth. With a shiver, Tang Un asked the others to speed up again. Huff, huff, huff. After running for a short distance, everyone was exhausted. Although they had some food just now, It was just a drop in the bucket. Everyone's energy was already depleted in the mine. How could they have any energy left to run? Looks like they're going to die today. Tang could not help but sigh in his heart. Unlike them, who started running first, they could fight a protracted battle. In this situation, at most an hour of running, everyone would be finished. Go up the hill. Tang roared. He was not a person who was willing to accept his fate. Now, they were betting on whether there were rivers or other terrain around. If there were, they would jump down. That way, a few of them might survive. If not, this hill would be their final battlefield. Yes, it would be a graveyard. The surrounding hills were relatively low, so it would not take much effort to climb up. But for Tang and the others, it was not a small test. A few soldiers who fell behind were caught up by the arrows and nailed to the side of the road. Huff, huff, huff. Tang panted and was the first to run to the top of the mountain. Without stopping to rest, he looked up. He was really dumbfounded now. Then the members of the gray space, Fry and the others, and the soldiers of the mine arrived one after another. Everyone looked down at the top of the mountain, stunned like stone statues. At the bottom of the hill, groups of soldiers passed by in formation. There were not many people, only about 70 or 80 of them. But now they were like a natural moat standing in front of Tang and the others. Swallowing his saliva, Tang took a deep breath. His eyes instantly turned red. Brothers, we have no other way out except to move forward. Even if we can't break through here, we have to at least drag someone down with us. At least we have to die in battle like men. Kill. After saying that, he rushed down the mountain. Kill. Without hesitation, David and the others roared and rushed down. F***CK, brothers, follow me. Let's fight together for the last time. Fry licked his lips and rushed down with the veterans under him. The remaining soldiers looked at each other, then looked down and back. They all looked like they were crying. Sigh, everyone, let's go. If you like this work, you are welcome to come a Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 206. There was such a type of person in this world. They were born noble and had an extraordinary aura. They didn't need any experience to be able to move unhindered and destroy strong enemies with a smile. They didn't need any actual combat to be able to look down on the world and determine victory from 1,000 miles away. They had incomparable confidence and an even stronger heart. All they needed was an opportunity. I thought I would have a chance to show off my skills and lead the troops to kill the enemies in the famous Ichen Legion. In the end, I became a complete bystander. How despicable! A well-dressed and noble young man held the reins of his horse and said angrily, "That's right. After attacking for so long, we can't even take down a bunch of mobs." Another young man waved his arm and said exaggerately, "I really suspect that after staying here for so long, I've lost confidence in the future of the Empire." That makes sense. TSK. Fame is indeed unreliable. What famous generals of the 3 major legions? They're just SOSO. If I were to lead the troops, I would only need a little strategy to flatten the Gray Coat Army. This was the valley where the 3 major legions and the Gray Coat Army were fighting. As for the group of young men who were discussing tactics and strategies, they were the outstanding students of the 1st Military Academy of Bran. They were in a bad mood at the moment. They had come out to study for so long, but in the end, they were busy running around. It was not easy to wait for the final battle, but they realized that they were excluded and could only be led by a group of soldiers all day long to watch the battle from tens of kilometers away. They were unhappy, of course. There were people who were even more unhappy than them. They were the group of soldiers who were in charge of guarding. Phew! A young soldier heard the group of noble young men talking about how the Legion was trash and couldn't help but let out a long breath. An old soldier grabbed his shoulder. "Forget it. Don't bother with them." "But they said the general." "General? The old soldier smiled and shook his head. "I'm afraid that other than the marshal, they would dare to say anything. I don't know what Marshal Z is thinking. He actually sent such a general. Isn't this ruining the Legion's undefeated reputation?" A voice came from behind. "Well, The old soldier opened his mouth and smiled bitterly. Just pretend I didn't say anything. The young soldier curled his lips. I think the general is being too nice to them. Why don't you just send them to the battlefield? I like to see how they're going to flatten the Gray Cloak Army. I can't do that. The veteran hurriedly waved his hand and said, even a strand of hair from these people is worth more than our lives. Do you see that one who just spoke? That's the second son of the Prime Minister of the Empire. And that one, that's the son of the Administrator. If anything happens to these people, it'll be a big deal. Pausing for a moment, the veteran soldier continued. They have been clamoring to go out and fight. The general is probably having a headache, so he threw them here. Let's just pretend that we didn't see or hear anything. We'll just walk around with them. Yes, we've arrived. The group stopped, and a person who seemed to be the captain walked to the back, bowed, and said something to the young nobles. Soon, there was an uproar at the back. Oh, what's wrong? The young soldier turned his head and asked. The veteran soldier helplessly said, they think it's too far away and not exciting enough. Behind him, the young nobles said angrily, we're tens of kilometers away from the battlefield. We can't even see anyone. How are we going to learn from this? But this is the safe distance set by the general. These young nobles were of high status, so they couldn't be careless with their security. Logically speaking, the Gray Cloak Army wouldn't come here, but Ralph still carefully set up some surveillance. Of course, now is the time to kill the Gray Cloak Army soldiers. Naturally, they wouldn't send too many people to do this, so the area of surveillance was limited. I don't care. We have to walk forward a little more. I'm puzzled. What are you afraid of? The battlefield is wide open, and we're so far away from the Gray Cloak Army. Even if they discover us, we have enough time to retreat. That's right. You're obviously making things difficult for us. My father is from the Empire's military law department. Be careful, or I'll sue you. Get out of my way. How dare a small soldier like you stop me? Some were forceful, and some were unreasonable. The pitiful captain was dizzy from all the scolding. In the end, he had no choice but to agree to their request. It wasn't that he was forced. It was just that it was impossible for the Gray Cloak Army to appear here. The team moved forward again. Their goal was the periphery of the mountain range, the edge of the valley. Actually, according to the young nobles, they wanted to move another 10 kilometers into the valley, all the way to the edge of the battlefield. However, the captain naturally wouldn't agree to this request. Ed, do you hear something? The young soldier looked around and asked. Sound? What sound? The old soldier asked in surprise. It sounds like the wind or the sound of an arrow piercing through the air. The young soldier said uncertainly. It's the wind. We're so far away from the battlefield. How can it be the sound of an arrow? Oh, not long after, the team was nearing their destination. A young noble looked ahead regretfully. What a pity. We can't move forward. These cowards. What's there to be afraid of about the Gray Cloak Army? Yes, if we go straight in, we might be able to launch a surprise attack and attack the enemy's headquarters. Haha, that's too exaggerated. I just hope that a scattered Gray Cloak Army will appear and let me show them. Kill. The young noble raised his head and saw a large group of people who looked like beggars in ragged clothes, holding muddy weapons, charging down from the hill. They really came? Set up the formation. Set up the formation. The captain was shocked by the sudden appearance of the group of people. He hurriedly shouted for the soldiers to face the hill and set up a half-moon defensive formation. At the same time, he turned around and shouted at the noble students, "Go quickly! Go quickly!" These young nobles were riding on horses. As long as they turned their horses around now. In addition to these soldiers delaying them for a while, they could definitely run far away. However, what are you panicking for? The young nobles were shocked at first. Then they saw the group of people charging down and said, "It's just 100 scattered soldiers. I order you to destroy them on the spot." It wasn't easy to meet the Gray Cloak Army. It wasn't easy to have a chance to show off their talents. Leave? Are you kidding? Those young nobles jumped off their war horses, drew their weapons, and stood behind the soldiers. "Saw you guys." The captain was anxious. "Soldier, pay attention to what's in front of you. Carelessness on the battlefield will cost you your life. A young noble lectured seriously. The captain opened his mouth and was completely speechless. Needless to say, this group of people who looked like beggars was naturally Tang In and the others who had nowhere to go. They saw that the other party had set up a standard defensive formation the moment they charged out. Tang Un's heart sank. Who were these people? The hill was low. It took less than 10 minutes to go up the hill, and it was even faster to go down the hill. Looking at the soldiers in front of him, Tang In quickly put away the distracting thoughts in his heart. No matter who they were, he would kill one and earn one. Tang In was the first to charge down, and his speed was also the fastest, so he was the first to wave his saber and crash into the formation. Ding, 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 not good, Tang In secretly shouted. Although he was not good at using a saber, his attacks were focused on stability, accuracy, and ruthlessness. These were all interconnected. He waved a dozen saber lights in an instant, but these soldiers actually blocked them clearly. They were not ordinary soldiers. Tang In's judgment was correct. Although there were only 70 or 80 soldiers here, all of them were the elites of the Zichan Legion. Bang, bang, bang. Fry and the others who came later also directly crashed into them, and the two sides engaged in a fierce battle at the foot of the hill. He leaned to the side to avoid a spear piercing towards his chest, grabbed it, and pulled. A soldier staggered out of the formation. However, before Tang In could do anything, 3 more spears quickly pierced towards his vital points. Clang, clang. The saber slashed against the spears, and Tang In floated back. Then he looked around. The situation was not optimistic. The members of the Gray Space and Frey's men were still barely holding on. However, the soldiers in the mine were obviously a few levels lower, and they were cut down from time to time. Of course, this was because the people here were too tired, but it was also an indisputable fact that the other party's combat strength was high. Zichan Legion. Fry forced himself to explode with fighting energy, sweeping away the soldiers in front of him, and suddenly shouted. He was a veteran of the battlefield. When he saw the other party's armor symbol, just now, he felt that it was a little familiar, but because he had not been in contact with it for a long time, he only reacted now. Damn, did he have to be so unlucky? Tang In had naturally heard of the title of the Empire's strongest legion. However, it was inevitable that he would be depressed under such circumstances. Motley crew. Is the Gray Coat Army's combat strength only like this? It's indeed disappointing. It seems that we don't need to do anything. Tang In looked in the direction of the voice and saw that behind the fully armed soldiers, there were more than a dozen young men in gorgeous clothes. Strange, this formation is to defend against us, or to protect these people. Without thinking carefully, Tang In decisively said, Fry, gather everyone and break through. Okay. Fry was trapped in the crowd. Although he did not know what Tang In meant by this, he obeyed. He quickly organized Titan, David and a few others with fighting energy to form an arrowhead and charged straight into the heart of the half-moon formation. Stop them. The captain saw the shining fighting energy and called for reinforcements. Haha, they're coming. Tang In swung his sword and threw it out, knocking a soldier into the air. Then his figure flashed, and he slipped into the gap created by the deployment of manpower. The surrounding soldiers were shocked and quickly attacked with swords and spears. However, at this time, Tang In's figure was like a fish in water. He flashed in and out of the crowd, appearing very sneaky. The soldiers were worried about hurting their companions, so they held back a little. This way, they naturally could not catch Tang In. Although his movements were scattered, Tang In obviously had a purpose. Frey's outburst would not last long. He had to break through immediately. There were only 70 or 80 people. How many layers of defense could there be? After activating the Phantom skill, Tang In flashed to the back of the defense line. Chaos Flower Break. The bloody flowers were enchanting, and the blade was biting cold. The last dozen or so soldiers at the last line of defense were all sent flying. Then, Tang In rushed out with a dagger in his hand, covered in blood, and went straight for the noble youths. The blood on his body was the enemy's, and also his own. In this state, if he wanted to break through quickly, he would have to pay a price. Good timing. Seeing that Twain had arrived, a noble youth actually let out a cry of joy and stepped forward, waving his slender sword repeatedly. Hiss, 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 under the white light. The sword shadows overlapped in the air and finally formed an elegant and dreamy lotus flower. It was exceptionally beautiful. Of course, beautiful things were usually fragile. Tang In saw the lotus flower enveloping him. His long and narrow eyes narrowed slightly, and then he rushed straight in without dodging. This idiot, this idiot, this idiot, ding, bang. The thin sword was sent flying, and the dreamy lotus flower was directly destroyed in the air. Then, a figure took a few steps in the air like an illusion, passing through the scattered sword light and arriving in front of the stunned noble youth. Your swordsmanship is not bad, but your use of it is too lousy. If you like this work, you're welcome to come Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 207. The nobles of the other world spared no effort in nurturing the next generation. This was the foundation for the prosperity of the family and passed down for several generations. Therefore, the descendants of these nobles would be sent to all kinds of aristocratic academies to learn from a young age. They would be taught etiquette, martial arts, management, and so on. Chi cultivation methods, martial arts, and so on that commoners could not even dream of were things that the descendants of nobles were born with. Some great nobles even had many, and they would choose the most suitable ones for their descendants to practice. Nobles naturally disdained to learn low-level martial arts like tortoise fist. Elegance and taste were the pursuits of nobles. As the saying goes, where there is demand, there's a market. Some schools with elegant moves were born. Among them, the most famous was the palace sword technique. The palace sword technique was mainly based on the sword. The sword technique was extremely beautiful and gorgeous, and when it was used, there would be a dreamy vision accompanying it. Therefore, it was greatly sought after by nobles. The noble youth who was now facing Tang Un was using one of the palace sword techniques, the palace white lotus. There were different schools of sword techniques, but there was no distinction of superiority. Just as Tang Un said, this noble youth's sword technique was indeed not bad, but it only referred to the sword technique itself. As for the person who used this sword technique, well, it was very bad, a complete mess. He was too focused on creating the white lotus vision and lost the killing intent in the flourishing and gorgeous sword technique. To put it simply, he was neglecting the essentials and focusing on the details. If this move was used against ordinary people or low-level martial artists who had not experienced actual combat, it would definitely have a crushing effect. But against Tang In, who had experienced hundreds of battles and killed countless people under his hands, well, there was no suspense. But the noble youth did not think so. When he saw the palace sword technique that he was most proud of, which could make noble girls scream like crazy every time he used it, his whole heart was broken. How could it be? The consequences of being stunned on the battlefield could naturally be imagined, so Tang In captured him effortlessly. How dare you? Stop! Exclamations and threats were heard almost instantly. The captain of the soldiers nervously spread out his hands, indicating Tang In to calm down. As for the noble youths, after being shocked, they started cursing loudly in anger. Tang In was also stunned when he saw everyone's reaction. He had only caught this noble youth to disrupt the opponent's attacking rhythm and delay time. TSK, TSK. It seemed like he caught a big fish. All of you stop. Otherwise, don't blame me. Tang In said viciously as he placed the dagger on the young noble's neck. He wasn't sure if this move would work. After all, the other party had the absolute advantage now. Unexpectedly, the captain immediately waved his hand at the soldiers who were fighting and shouted, "Back off! Everyone back off!" Fry and the others, who were fighting bitterly, suddenly saw the soldiers in front of them retreat like a tide. Their mouths were wide open and they were stunned on the spot. Why did they retreat? If the other party attacked again, they would definitely be lying here. Damn, this works too. Tang and licked his lips, feeling ecstatic. Calm down, calm down. You must be soldiers who have retreated from the battlefield. As long as you let that person go, we can let you go now. The captain was now full of regret. If he had known earlier, he wouldn't have gotten so close to these noble youths. Tang and opened his mouth and was about to speak. Suddenly, a voice came from above. Yo, they're accomplices. Brothers shoot. Whoosh, 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 damn it. Tang and immediately raised his head and saw the pursuing soldiers on top of the hill, shooting down a rain of arrows from above. Damn it. Defend. The captain immediately shouted when he saw the sudden attack. Almost instantly, 70 to 80 soldiers stepped forward and grabbed the shields behind them to form shelter. Bang, bang, bang. Arrows rained down on the shields like raindrops hitting banana leaves. These soldiers expanded the area of defense, enveloping the group of noble youths, as well as Twain's group. Fry and the others saw that the situation was not good and hurriedly went in. Although this kind of defense covered a large area, it was inevitable that there would be gaps. Immediately, 10 or so soldiers groaned and fell under the rain of arrows. Damn it! Which division are you from? We are the Zechen Legion. The captain roared angrily. Shoot! I am the Zechen Legion. Zechen Legion? After hearing the captain's words, the commander who gave the order to shoot opened his eyes wide and broke out in cold sweat. He looked carefully at the insignia on the armor of the soldiers below. Oh God, they are really from the Zechen Legion. Stop shooting, stop shooting. The man's voice was dry and hoarse. He was about to cry. Now he really wanted to turn around and leave with the soldiers as if they had never been here. Our horses. One of the noble youths looked back and saw that the 10 or so handsome horses behind them had become porcupines. This result was certain. As the saying goes, shoot the horse before shooting the man. The pursuing soldiers would not give Tang In and the others a chance to escape, so they paid special attention to this. Damn it. Where are you from? I, as the eldest son of Duke Tiffany, announced that this matter will be investigated to the end. I, in the name of Marquis Domenica, I, in the name of Marquis Oslo. In an instant, the verbal announcements of the 10 or so great nobles came crashing down. The soldiers above looked at each other. In the end, they collectively looked at the commander who gave the order to shoot. That person was straightforward. His eyes rolled back and he fell to the ground. 10 or so great nobles, and they were all counts and marquises. He could imagine that if they held him responsible for deliberately murdering the descendants of nobles, he would definitely be hanged 10 times. F***CK. It's really a big fish. I'm saved this time. Happiness came too quickly. Tang In's head was dizzy, as if a meat pie had fallen from the sky and hit him. Lowly commoner, let me go if you don't want to die. I'm warning you. I am the second son of the Empire's Prime Minister, Duke Alfrey. The noble youth who was held hostage by Tang In finally came back to his senses and immediately threatened. Capture them. Tang In didn't pay attention to the noble youth. Instead, he quickly shouted at Fry, "Quick, attack. Don't kill our honorable little knight." Of course, those seeking death don't count. When Fry and the others were dodging the rain of arrows, they had already arrived behind the soldiers. Now that they heard Tang In's words, they immediately pounced on the group of noble youths without hesitation. Damn it, you dare. The captain was both anxious and furious. One captive was enough for him. If all of them were killed at once, he didn't dare to imagine what would happen next. Stop him. Pa! Suddenly, there was a loud slap that made the captain swallow his order. You dare to hit me? The noble youth who was being held hostage was at a loss, shock, anger, humiliation. You dare to hit me? You're dead. You're definitely dead. Pa! Another slap was thrown. Then, Tang In wiped his bloody fingers on the face of the stunned noble youth. My dear Duke, you're now a captive. Do you know what a captive is? It's pa. Tang In's palm gently patted the noble youth's face. It means that I can hit you or even kill you, and you can only watch, understand? The noble youth's mind was in complete chaos. I've actually been hit. Pa, you still don't seem to understand. Tang Yin frowned and continued to pat the noble youth's bloody face. Yes, I understand. After being patted awake, the noble youth nodded with a face full of humiliation. Damn it, I'm going to kill him. I'm going to kill him. Tis TSK, that's right. You're worthy of being a noble. You're quick to understand. Tang Yin smacked his lips and nodded with satisfaction. Then I'll ask a few more questions. I don't think you'll refuse. No, I won't. Your performance is getting better and better. I have high hopes for you. Just now you said that we retreated from the battlefield. What does that mean? Ah. The noble youth opened his mouth in confusion. Why did he ask this question? Could it be that they weren't the Gray Coat Army? What, you don't know? Tang Yin's tone was slightly heavy. I know. The noble youth hurriedly responded, and then said, Our 3 major legions are currently fighting the Gray Coat Army tens of kilometers away, so we thought that you guys had escaped from the battlefield. Retreated. Aren't you the Gray Coat Army? As long as you let me go, I'll give you a lot of gold coins. Pa, don't say what you shouldn't say. Tang Yin put down his hand, and then said with a complicated expression, The Gray Coat Army? Fighting on the side? What's the situation now? While Tang Yin was interrogating the slightly arrogant young duke, Fry and the rest were fighting with the group of noble youths. As for the soldiers, because of Tang Yin's actions, they didn't dare to move in the slightest. They really couldn't bear the death of even one noble student. These noble youths were naturally strong. Most of them were at the beginner level, and there were 1 or 2 at the intermediate level. Logically speaking, it shouldn't be a problem for these dozen or so warriors to take care of the tired soldiers like Fry and the rest, but the reality wasn't so. The light and beautiful noble swords were knocked away as soon as they came into contact with the sabers, and the elegant and beautiful swords were immediately broken down after a few strong slashes. Even if they stabbed their opponents, they would fiercely grab the sword and use the momentum to swing their sabers. Gradually, these noble youths became more and more disorganized. They had a body full of fighting energy, but they couldn't use it to their full potential. They were so depressed that they wanted to vomit blood. Vulgar, barbaric, ugly. How could they fight like this? Damn it, what are you guys waiting for? Come and help. A noble youth who had his sword taken away hurriedly dodged David's attacks and scolded the soldiers of the Zichan Legion. The soldiers looked at each other, then at their captain, then at Tang Yin's side. Their expressions were complicated. How could they help in this situation? 1 on one side and a dozen on the other. That's right. Logically speaking, they should save the dozen or so youths to minimize their losses. But when the safety of any one of them could cause a storm, they could only watch from the sidelines. This wasn't a matter of whether they had the courage or not, but that they couldn't bear the responsibility and couldn't make the decision. Under the conflicted gazes of the soldiers, the noble youths were taken down one by one. Finally, as the last noble youth's fighting energy armor was broken, the entire group was captured. Phew! It's finally over. The surrounding soldiers suddenly felt a strange sense of relief. Thank goodness, no one died. Who's that? Tang Yin, who had finished gathering information, waved at the captain. Go back and tell your general that we need to pass through. As for the reason is that we sincerely invite these dear little noble knights to visit the Gray Coat Army. Very sincere. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 208. Fate was a child who liked to play pranks. He always liked to use a pile of stinky dog poop to wrap sweet candies, and named them Dog Poop Luck. Tang Yin and the others had stepped on several piles of dog poop. They were cheated, hunted, captured, and buried in the mines. Now, they finally had a glimmer of hope and obtained this candy. In the middle of the day, in the empty space in the valley. Damn it, walk faster. David. Tang Yin cast a reproachful glance and spread his hands. How can you be so rude to a noble guest? Even if he is a captive, the Gray Coat Army has a rule of preferential treatment for captives. Not to mention that he saved our lives. So, we must be harmonious. We must be loving. Okay. David scratched his head and smiled embarrassedly. He then bowed and waved his hands. Masters, this way, please. Yo, take care. There are stones here. Let me help you kick them away. Huh. Everyone bent over and burst into laughter. After being tense for so long, Tang In and the others were in a good mood now that they were finally safe. Of course, in comparison, the noble youths were in a tragic situation. Originally, they wanted to become famous in one fell swoop, but now they were almost killed before they could achieve anything. At this moment, they were embarrassed and angry, and they were mumbling nonstop. It was obvious that they were saying things like, "Damned lowly commoners, I'll kill you all," and so on. Tang In and the others were now walking towards the Gray Coat Army's encampment in the valley. Behind them was a group of Zechen Legion soldiers who looked depressed. After sending a few people back to report, they were worried that Tang In and the others would kidnap the noble students, so they followed behind them. Further behind were nearly 1,000 soldiers from a military armament department. If the faces of the Zechen Legion soldiers were dejected, then their faces were mourning. Killing the elite soldiers of the Zechen Legion and murdering the descendants of more than 10 great nobles. If they could turn back time, they would definitely choose to send Tang Un and the others off with 8 palanquins when they first met them. Brother Fry, what do you plan to do next? Tang In approached Fry and asked. If it was before when they came out of the mine, Fry and the soldiers could have chosen to leave. But now that they had done such a heaven-defying thing, it was impossible for them to leave peacefully. I don't know. Fry shook his head and looked into the distance blankly. Sorry, it's all because of us. Fry waved his hand. Brother Arthur, there's no need to say more. If it wasn't for you, we would have died in the mine. After a pause, he continued, I thought that I would die in the mine with my brother for the rest of my life, but I didn't expect this to happen. Haha, in fact, when the mine was in chaos, I was quite happy. I used to be a soldier. To be able to stand side by side with my brothers and finally die on the battlefield is the best ending. But the more I wanted to die, the more I couldn't. Fry laughed bitterly, his face full of frustration and bitterness. Tang In raised his eyebrows. If you don't have anywhere to go, I have a suggestion. Join the Gray Coat Army. Fry turned his head and asked. Yes. Tang In nodded. This suggestion wasn't hard to guess. Of course, this isn't a good suggestion, but maybe, it can fulfill your wish of dying on the battlefield. Your way of persuading people to join is quite novel. Fry chuckled and said, I'll discuss it with my brothers later. Okay. Tang In nodded. To be honest, Tang In really wanted to pull Fry into the Gray Coat Army. He was definitely a mature military talent. If it wasn't for the fact that he was already set and Tang In was worried about wasting his usefulness, Tang In would have pulled him into the gray space. Fry suddenly exclaimed and looked ahead with a frown. Tang In also raised his head and saw a long black line at the end of the boundless wilderness. Trouble is coming. There must be at least 10,000 soldiers. Fry muttered. Tang In narrowed his eyes and sighed. This send-off is really grand. Whoosh! Everyone also saw the black line in the distance and couldn't help but stop in their tracks. There was an uproar. On the other hand, the young nobles were filled with excitement, as if their savior had arrived. Don't panic. Let's go and meet them. Tang In turned his head and said as he strode forward. Tang In had played a huge role on the way here from the mine. To put it in an exaggerated way, some of the soldiers had begun to worship him. So when everyone saw Tang In walking in front without a change in expression, they were all shocked and followed behind him with their heads held high. The two sides gradually approached, and the black line also began to elongate. If it continued, it would probably be several miles away. There must be at least 15,000 soldiers. Frey's judgment was more accurate as they got closer. There's not much difference. Tang In turned his head and smiled. Fry was stunned, and then he couldn't help but laugh. Yes, there were only 100 of them. Whether the other side had 10,000 or 15,000 soldiers, there really wasn't much difference. 10 miles, 8 miles, 5 miles, The black line began to gradually divide into specific black dots. Each black dot represented a soldier. Thud, thud, thud. Heavy and firm footsteps could be heard from afar. To be honest, if one didn't face it for real, one would never be able to imagine the feeling of an army approaching. This was a force that could crush everything. In front of this force, even the air was suffocating and a person was minuscule. So minuscule that even fear and other emotions were superfluous. Although everyone kept telling themselves to stay calm, their bodies gradually stiffened, and a feeling called trembling spread throughout their bodies. "Wow, it's so majestic!" David opened his mouth and exclaimed. Then, as if he had discovered something, he pointed to the front curiously. "Hey, look, the color of their armor is different." Everyone turned their heads stiffly and stared at David as if they were looking at a monster. "Damn, is this the time to talk about this? Aren't you nervous? Why are you all looking at me like that?" David looked at himself and scratched his head in confusion. Everyone was speechless. At times like this, perhaps only David, who had always been a fool, would be concerned about the color of the armor. But now, it seemed like they were a fool too. Fry licked his lips and said, "Yes, this is the Zechen Legion, Sangyin Legion. Yes, and the Thunderbolt's army." "Oh, no wonder." David nodded and touched his chin. "I think the color of the Zechen Legion's armor is the best. It's so eye-catching. Don't you all agree?" Everyone swallowed their dry throats and didn't know if they should continue the conversation. But no matter what, David's offline performance made everyone feel a little less nervous. At this time, the distance between the two sides was only a few hundred meters. Those with good eyesight could even see the outline of the soldiers on the other side. However, both sides didn't seem to have any intention of stopping. They were still getting closer. 800 meters, 600 meters, their steps were like thunder, and their aura was like a tidal wave. 400 meters, 300 meters, standing still like a mountain, their killing intent turned into ice. At this time, they were already within the range of the arrows. All the soldiers stopped when the long bugle sounded. Creak! It was as if thousands of branches were bent at the same time. A large number of arrows were raised at an angle of 30 degrees. This was an attack. Everyone's hearts trembled, and they couldn't help but stop in their tracks. "Continue walking." A low voice came from the front. Tang and took a steady step forward. "Damn it, let's do it." Everyone gritted their teeth and lifted their leaden legs to continue walking. Tap, tap, tap. Everyone took a step forward. Tang, unstep. This sound couldn't be compared to the sound of the soldiers marching before, but it had a firm and unyielding spirit. 200 meters, 100 meters, almost as if they were enduring the pressure. Everyone moved forward another 200 meters. "Stop!" Tang and raised his hand and stood firmly on the spot. The winter wind was biting cold, and the chill was threatening. Both sides were so close to each other, facing each other in silence. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 209. More than 10,000 fully armed soldiers with murderous intent. More than 100 ragged, sallow, and emaciated beggars. If these two groups faced each other in the wilderness, what would be your first impression? A mantis blocking a chariot? An ant attacking an elephant? That was probably how he felt about it. This kind of overconfident behavior was undoubtedly laughable, even absurd. It could be directly equated with courting death. As a bystander, we could curl our lips in disdain and say, "Idiot." But please don't forget that the world is never equal. One day, you'll be in a similar situation. At that time, will you have the courage to raise your arm like a mantis and face the rolling wheels head-on? Will you have the courage to open your mouth like an ant and bite the thick elephant leg? Yes, the outcome will be to be crushed into leaves by the wheels and crushed into pieces by the elephant leg. Is it meaningless? Maybe, but at least you resisted. At least you made the wheels lift by 1 millimeter in that instant. At least you left a shallow tooth mark on the elephant leg. The strong have the right to kill everything in seconds, and the weak should also resist everything. Close. Coo, coo, coo. A few bugles with different rhythms sounded. The soldiers on the left and right flanks stepped forward and finally surrounded Tang In and the others from 50 meters away. Kill, kill, kill. The dense forest of spears was raised, and the sound of a tsunami resounded through the sky. It was deafening. Momentum can also kill. Like a gust of wind, Tang In felt suffocated and his body couldn't help but sway a little. The people behind him were even worse off. Except for Fry and the others who took half a step back, most of them had a drastic change in expression and took a few big steps back. Roar! This can't go on. Tang In suddenly let out a long roar and took a step forward against the solid air pressure. He flipped his hand and flashed a dagger, preparing to attack. Aren't you strong? I'll attack first. How dare you? With a sudden roar, a figure jumped up and jumped over the soldiers in front of him. He landed on the ground and ran a few steps, instantly arriving in front of Tang In. Zung! As soon as the short and sharp sound of a sword was heard, the bright light of the blade reached Tang In's head. Die! If the royal sword technique was said to be dazzling and complicated, then this strike was simple and crude. This was a technique that had been honed on the battlefield. Direct, ruthless, and indomitable. In the face of such an attack, the noble youth's swordsmanship was nothing more than a child's show-off. As if he could not withstand such a sharp blade aura, Tang In's body swayed left and right, back and forth like a willow in a strong wind. Hiss! The gleam of the blade flashed and slid past Tang In's figure like water. Oh no, it's empty. Bang! Scram! As if responding to this word, the person who attacked transformed into a bowed shrimp and flew back at a speed faster than when he came. He landed on the ground and rolled a few times until he reached the feet of the soldiers at the front. Tang In pulled back his right leg expressionlessly. Forget about ganging up on me, but you're King challenging me one-on-one. The surrounding soldiers could not help but hold their breaths. In the era of cold weapons, when the two sides faced each other, there was still more emphasis on one-on-one battles between warriors. Although it was far from the extent of collapse because of one side's defeat, the morale would still be affected. If it was the victorious side, they would usually take advantage of the opportunity to launch a large-scale attack. Of course, Tang In and the others were not qualified to launch a large-scale attack now. However, the soldiers seemed to be enraged. They stepped forward and waved their weapons. Kill, 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 kill your mother. You only know how to howl. Come if you have the ability. Tang In waved his dagger and roared with a ferocious face. Kill your mother. Come on. See if your master David can't kill you bastards. Come on, I've killed enough. If you frown, you're raised by your grandmother. Come on. The people behind him were provoked by Tang In's actions. They surged forward and pointed at the soldiers, shouting and provoking them. The soldiers of the three major legions were even angrier. One had to know that when they fought with the barbarians in the northern wilderness, they would fight as soon as they saw them. They had never met such a shameless opponent. Kill them. I'm going to crush their heads. Chop them into meat paste. The orderly's shouting finally stopped. Now, it was a confrontation of different dialects. Although his words were more vicious, his imposing manner was still messed up. Stop shouting. If you don't dare to come, then we'll come first. Tang In looked at the soldiers in front of him with disdain. He turned around and pointed at a young noble. Michaud, return the dagger that they used to attack me. Okay. Michaud raised his dagger without hesitation. Wait. Stop. Don't you dare. 3 thunder roars sounded almost at the same time. Then, 3 generals in high-grade armor walked out of the soldiers with a majestic gait. They were the silent eagle Ralph, the mad general of the battlefield Barlow, and the northern wolf Gary. Damn it, they finally came out. Tang In narrowed his eyes. At this moment, Ralph and the other 2 generals did not look too good. Originally, they were urging the soldiers to continuously attack the Gray Coat Army's camp. When they heard that the noble students were kidnapped, they were so shocked that they could not believe their ears. How is this possible? The battlefield was surrounded, and the gray coat army could not even take care of themselves. How could they send people to locate the noble students? How could they go around them and ambush them? But no matter how impossible it was a foregone conclusion. The importance of the noble students was self-evident. To a certain extent, it could be said that the value of the noble students was much higher than the value of the gray coat army. After a hasty discussion, Ralph and the others decided to transfer most of the soldiers to the ambush team. It would be best if they could save the noble students without shedding a drop of blood. However, what happened next was beyond their expectations. The miserable-looking ambush team of 100 people dared to walk towards the tens of thousands of soldiers. Even when the archers drew their bows and arrows, the ambush team brazenly walked forward for 200 meters. What kind of situation was this? Perhaps a person was not afraid of death, but in front of an army full of murderous intent, they would definitely be intimidated. This had nothing to do with other emotions. It was an instinctive reaction of the human body. It was as if the weather was cold and they had to curl up their bodies. Soon, they knew that the reason for these people's actions was because of the person who walked at the front of the group. Therefore, when the person provoked them to attack, they sent out the best soldiers in the army, hoping to kill the person and win back their momentum. But then they realized that they had made a bad move. The soldier was not a match for the person and was sent flying back in an instant. In the end, the enemy's momentum was boosted. In the end, they were even forced to come out. It could be said that until now, all of their previous calculations had failed. Gary's face was gloomy. I can tell you very clearly that you will not be able to walk out of here alive. Tang and picked his ear and turned his head impatiently. Michaud, why haven't you cut him yet? Oh. Michaud nodded and stabbed the young noble's thigh. No. Ah. The young noble cried out in pain and fell to the ground, rolling desperately. Originally, he thought that the generals would be able to help them escape, but he did not expect to be stabbed instead. Save me. I'm going to die. Save me. Sob. The young noble had grown up smoothly and had never been injured like this before. Looking at the blood that kept flowing out of his thigh, he immediately burst into tears and snot, thinking that he was going to die. But in fact, Michaud's knife had avoided the artery, so it was not fatal at all. This was also the reason why Tang and asked Michaud to do it. If it were David, he would have foolishly chopped off the young noble's head. You. Baylor opened his mouth, his face full of anger. Tang touched his nose and looked at Gary with an embarrassed expression. Sorry, it was too noisy just now. I didn't hear what you said clearly. Can you repeat it again? The corners of Gary's eyes twitched, and his face was gloomy. Seeing that he did not speak, Tang shrugged helplessly. So, now it's my turn to speak. Well, we sincerely invite these noble young knights to be guests of the Gray Coat Army. I believe that this will be a perfect and enjoyable experience. Generals, is it convenient for you to let us pass? Perfect? Enjoyable? Damn it. The soldiers looked at the young noble who was crying out in pain on the ground, and the corners of their mouths twitched. Inhaling, Baylor took a deep breath and said word by word, You can not go. Oh, is that so? Tang frowned. Let's go. I'm dying. I need treatment. I'm dying. The young noble covered the wound on his thigh, tears streaming down his face. Shut up, Baylor suddenly shouted. His eyes were like copper bells, and his voice was like thunder. The young noble was stunned. You are all children of the great nobles of the empire, and you should know what it means to be captured. You enjoy a halo that ordinary people cannot reach, and you should sacrifice yourself for the glory of the empire. After shouting, Baylor did not look at these young nobles anymore. His lion-like eyes stared straight at Tang. Let me introduce you, Mad General of the battlefield, Baylor. This time, the Gray Coat Army has indeed given me many surprises. I admit that you are very brave and very impressive. I admit that the people you captured are very valuable, so valuable that it may even exceed your imagination. However, I am a mad general, and there are only soldiers on the battlefield, not nobles. I definitely will not let you take them away alive. Is that so? I bet that you will. Baylor suddenly turned his head and his eyes instantly widened. Fry walked out from the crowd and said with a complicated expression, "Long time no see, Baylor. A madman on the battlefield. Oh, a mad general on the battlefield now. A person who fights like a madman cannot be a general, so you're actually much calmer than others think." Fra, Captain Fry. Baylor opened his mouth, and then his face was filled with surprise. "You're still alive? Haha, you're still alive. Do you know how long I have been looking for you? I always thought that you were already dead. What was this situation? Meeting an old friend in a foreign land?" Tangan looked at both sides in a daze. This atmosphere was a little off. Yes, I also thought that I was dead, but the ironic thing is that I can't die. Baylor laughed bitterly and then pointed at the people behind him. "Do you still recognize them? Bamboo Pole, Skinny Monkey, Big Bear." Baylor looked at his brothers who had been following Fry and called out their nicknames one by one with a perplexed expression. "Lunatic, long time no see. Lunatic, you're doing well. You have even become a general. Congratulations, congratulations." They seemed to be very familiar with Baylor, and those people greeted him with smiles on their faces. "General Baylor, this is?" Gary asked in astonishment. Baylor's eyes were slightly red, and he took a few deep breaths. The Thunderbolts Army used to have a Thunderbolt formation breaking team, and we were all in this team. The captain was Thunderbolt Spear Fry. Thunderbolt formation breaking team. Gary muttered a few words and looked at Ralph. Then he said in astonishment, "The Thunderbolt formation breaking team that would always be the first to attack the enemy's camp in every battle. Every army had its own elite team, and the Thunderbolt formation breaking team was a small elite team in the Thunderbolts Army. They did not have many people, only about 200. However, in every field battle, they would always be the first to attack the enemy's camp. In every city battle, they would always be the first to take down the walls." Naturally, the various armies had heard of such outstanding military achievements. However, more than 10 years ago, this team suddenly disappeared. After that, although the Thunderbolts Army reformed the Thunderbolt formation breaking team several times, they were not as powerful as they were now. In the end, there was nothing definite about them. More than 10 years ago, a noble came to our army to gild himself. Under the circumstances where he did not understand the enemy's situation, he randomly gave our team a mission. In the end, although our team completed the mission, we were heavily surrounded. More than half of our brothers were killed or injured, but no one came to rescue us. In the end, after Captain Fry brought us out of the perilous situation, we found out that the noble had already received his military achievements and was on his way back. More than 200 people, and only 20 or so people came back alive. Our brothers all wanted to take revenge. At that time, only I had a wife and children, so Captain Fry did not bring me along. At this point, Baylor's tears flowed freely. In the end, they killed thousands of miles. When the noble was about to board a ship and return to the south, they chopped off his head. This matter became very big in the end and implicated many people. Although the army came forward to mediate, the noble family was still unwilling to let go. In the end, Captain Fry and the others went to the military court and were sentenced to death by hanging. I have been looking for them for the past few years, wanting to collect their bones, but I could not find them. I did not expect to meet them here today. Baylor's tone was low, and his expression was very sad. The Thunderbolt formation breaking team captain, who had been insufferably powerful back then, was now in such a miserable state. However, it was good to be alive, but who would have thought that the next time they met alive would be on the battlefield? Fry laughed bitterly and said, "We were lucky." At that time, the prison cells for the death row prisoners were already full. We stayed in the prison cells for the serious criminals first. In the end, Lord Solomon sent people to pick coolies, and we were bought without knowing what happened. We worked as coolies for more than 10 years. Damn, this was too awesome. Tang was elated when he heard this. No, this time, he had to make Fry and the others stay. After this episode, the situation was still the same. However, perhaps because of Fry, Baylor did not speak at this time. Cough, cough, I don't want to disturb you. But this young knight has lost a lot of blood. If we don't hurry and treat him, I'm afraid his leg will be crippled." Tang In pointed at the pale young noble and spread out his hands. Baylor continued to remain silent. Gary furrowed his brows, appearing to be a little uncertain. Just like what had happened to Fry previously, these young nobles could not die in front of them. However, if they were to let them go, not only would it mean that their plan to attack the Grey Coat army had completely failed, but they might also face kidnapping and extortion. "Let's go," Ralph, who had been quiet all this time, said. Gary looked at Ralph and finally shook his head gently. With a wave of his hand, the army that was surrounding them dispersed to form a path. Tang In and the others helped the young noble who was rolling on the ground and slowly walked over. "Captain Fry." Baylor looked at Fry, who walked past him. His mouth moved, but he could not say anything in the end. The captain was still the same captain, but was Lunatic still the same lunatic? If this was in the past, even if Fry and the others had committed serious crimes, he would still take them in. But now, Lunatic, don't think about anything else. Work hard. In the end, you're the only one who has a future. As if he knew what Baylor was thinking, Fry patted Baylor's shoulder and comforted him. "Lunatic, work hard. You'll have a future." Baylor lowered his head and suddenly remembered that Captain Fry had patted his shoulder countless times in the past and said almost the same thing. The brothers behind Fry went forward one by one to greet Baylor. They beat their chests, hugged them, patted their heads. Their methods were very casual, but there was a sense of familiarity and closeness. The encirclement of 10 to 20,000 people naturally overlapped and covered a huge area. Tang In and the others slowly advanced under the gazes of the soldiers on both sides. Of course, their battle swords were still behind the young noble. Before everything was settled, it was better to be careful. "Stop!" Tang In, who was walking in front, suddenly frowned and raised his hand. "Huh?" Everyone looked at Tang In confusion. "Look at you trying to hide in front of me." Tang In pursed his lips and turned to the three generals, saying, "The send-off is already grand enough. So it's better to let those brothers underground come out for some fresh air." Everyone was shocked when they heard this. They looked straight at the ground in front of them. Yellow grass, dark soil. This was very normal. Was there someone underground? Baylor and Ralph both looked at Gary. The group of soldiers who separated the path were wearing green armor. They were from the Blue Flame Army. Based on the personality of the Northern Blue Wolf, the underground people would really do something like this. The cold wind was cold, and the atmosphere was tense again. Gary looked at Tang In again with a sinister gaze. It was as if he wanted to engrave him in his heart. He snorted and waved his hand. An officer ran to the front awkwardly and clapped his hands. Bang, bang, bang. Dirt and grass flew in all directions. Tens of nimble, dark cyan-armored soldiers rose from the ground, nimbly landing beside Ji Hao. In an instant, the flat ground was full of holes. From the fresh soil that was dug out, it could be seen that these caves were newly dug. It was probably done while the soldiers were surrounding them. "Northern Blue Wolf, Gary." Gary looked straight into Tang In's eyes and said coldly, "Do you dare tell me your name?" The feeling of being stared at by a general was obviously not good. However, Tang In shrugged casually. "Sure, I'm Arthur. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation." Chapter 210. In the valley, at the Grey Coat Army's encampment. In fact, it was called an encampment, other than the mounds. There were no military tents on the ground at all, and even people were rare. The crisscrossing underground tunnels had already cut this originally complete piece of land into pieces. Here, one could see the Grey Coat Army's people shuttling back and forth. The soldiers in messy plate armor carefully peeked outside, while taking bread and other food from the people. It was lunchtime now, but because of the recent intense battle, this was where they ate. In the middle of the encampment, the atmosphere here was slightly more relaxed. Most of the people walking back and forth were commoners in plain clothes, and there was less of a murderous aura. At this moment, A young man in military uniform was walking through the twists and turns of the tunnel. It seemed that he was a frequent visitor. After arriving at a certain place, people kept coming up to greet him. It's Officer Borg. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Are you looking for Josiah? She went out. I think she went to the back to observe the battle situation. Oh, thank you. I'll go look for her then. Borg smiled and nodded. Then, he turned around and walked along the tunnel to the back. After seeing Borg leave, the few people who had greeted him gathered together again. Borg has been coming very frequently recently. Do you think he likes Miss Josiah? Is there need to ask? It's obvious. But I think Miss Josiah doesn't seem to like him. No way. Isn't Miss Josiah very enthusiastic every time he comes? Borg is an officer of the tactical department, and he's not bad looking. I think the two of them are quite compatible. Miss Josiah is enthusiastic about everyone. Anyway, I feel that Miss Josiah won't like Borg. Well, that's true. The man touched his chin and said coldly, Then do you like Miss Josiah? Yes, no. Ha, as expected. Well, then do you like her or not? Tell me. Hey, don't go hot. Borg, who was striding away, didn't know that he had a love rival. However, even if he knew, he still had absolute confidence in defeating his opponent. Indeed, even though he was no longer an aristocrat, he was still much more elegant than a normal person due to his aristocratic education. In addition, he had an outstanding appearance and a smart mind. In the Gray Coat Army, he was not afraid of anyone's challenge. Josiah. Borg sighed inwardly. To be honest, he was feeling a little frustrated. That's right. Over the past few days, his relationship with Josiah had always been very good, much better than the others. But as smart as he was, he could tell that this was just a friendship between friends. He had just met her earlier than the others, of course. He also secretly probed, but the results were always unsatisfactory. She seemed to be only interested in what she was doing right now. No way. How could a girl of her age not fantasize about a beautiful relationship? Then what was the problem? Naturally, Borg had played with women before. At that time, he was still a noble. When he was a teenager, he had already tasted the bone-eroding taste of a maid. Even if he didn't get those easily available, he had also pursued many noble girls. However, the moves that were extremely useful in the past were all useless now. What did she want? Appearance? Temperament? Wealth? No, Josiah isn't such a person. Otherwise, I wouldn't like her so much. Maybe she's just being reserved. Forget it. She'll be mine in the end, won't she? While thinking, Borg had already arrived at the back of the encampment. After sorting out his emotions and asking a few people, he quickly found Josiah lying behind the mound. He seemed to be observing the entrance of the valley. That was where the feudal lord's soldiers were stationed. With a smile on his face, Borg jumped out of the passage and walked over. How is it? Did you find anything? Huh? Josiah turned his head in surprise and stuck out his tongue. It's Borg. I'm sorry. I thought you were coming to find me in the afternoon. It's fine. I don't have much work to do anyway. Borg waved his hand carelessly and then said gently, Here? Well, here we can combine the facts and explain in more detail. Yes, I think so too. They're setting up the crescent moon formation, right? Josiah said as he looked at the formation of the feudal lord's soldiers at the entrance of the valley. Borg nodded and praised. Not bad. You're a fast learner. This is a modified crescent moon formation that's just right for the current terrain. Well, originally this formation could be used to attack and defend, but after some changes, the sharpness of the attack has been removed and the thickness of the defense has been strengthened. You're the one who taught me well. Josiah laughed and then said worriedly, I don't know when we'll be able to break out of here. So many people have already died. Don't worry too much. This is a good formation, but these feudal lord soldiers are still a little weak. We'll definitely be able to walk out of here in 3 days at most. Well, I hope so. Josiah sighed. Josiah, why are you? Hey, Borg is here too. A voice came from behind. Josiah and Borg turned around in surprise. Aunt Rosa. Leader Rosa. Rosa was smiling with a large group of people behind her. Although she looked relaxed, her fatigue could still be seen from her bloodshot eyes. Yes. Rosa pulled Josiah aside as soon as she walked in and whispered, "You still don't want to admit it. Now I've caught you, haha." Huh? Josiah opened his mouth slightly and then thought of something. He blushed and said, "No, Aunt Rosa, Borg is here to teach me battle tactics." "Teach you battle tactics?" Rosa nodded and said thoughtfully, "That's a good excuse. Looks like he's the one who chased you." "Yes, that must be it." Josiah bit his lower lip and was speechless. "Well, you have nothing to say now, right?" Rosa looked as if she had discovered a secret. Josiah blinked and quickly said, "Aunt Rosa is here to patrol, right? Then we won't disturb you. Borg, let's go." After that, he quickly turned around and was about to leave. "Huh?" Borg was confused. "You always do this." Rosa grabbed Josiah's arm and said, "You're not going anywhere today. Just follow me." "Borg, you come too." "No, Aunt Rosa. That Borg still has things to do." "Borg, don't you think so?" Borg looked innocent. "What's going on? Don't give me that look. Don't think I can't see it." Rosa smiled and grabbed Josiah. "The battle tactics have already been decided. What else does Borg have to do?" Josiah looked helpless. He couldn't do anything about this gossipy Aunt Rosa. Just as Josiah was racking his brains to think of a way to get out of this, whoosh. Suddenly, a burst of cheers came from afar. Then, the sound became louder and louder. Rosa and the others were stunned. They were being surrounded. Where did the cheers come from? It could be said that if the cheers didn't come from afar, they would have thought that the cheers came from the army. "Go and see what happened." Rosa turned around and said to the person behind her, "Yes, sir." The person turned around and ran forward. However, after a few steps, he saw a sergeant running over. "Leader Rosa, the enemy retreated." "Leader Rosa, the enemy retreated." Rosa and the others were stunned again. This time, it wasn't because they were confused. It was because the joy came too quickly. They couldn't react at all. Retreated? Borg's face was filled with disbelief. How is that possible? One had to know that he had just returned from the front line. It was mealtime then, so the enemy didn't attack. Logically speaking, they should be attacking now. Furthermore, the enemy had the advantage. How could they retreat? Could it be a conspiracy? "Leader Rosa, the enemy retreated." The soldier finally ran to Rosa. Although he was panting, his face was filled with excitement. "Are you sure they retreated?" Rosa calmed herself down and asked. "Yes, the enemy soldiers gathered together and retreated 10 miles. The soldier quickly said. The valley was wide open. If they retreated 10 miles, there would be no space for them to play any tricks. "Do you know why they retreated?" Rosa asked. Naturally, they were worried that the enemy would retreat for no reason. It seems that the brothers from the gray space have captured an important person of the enemy. Josiah opened his mouth and suddenly exclaimed, "The gray space." Yes, it's this gray space." The soldier nodded. "Haha, Tang, I knew you wouldn't die. I knew it." At this time, Josiah was obviously in a state of ecstasy. He couldn't stop repeating. Then, he directly jumped down the passage, staggered for a moment, and ran forward quickly. Josiah, wait, don't run so fast." Rosa shouted and then jumped down the passage. "Borg, let's go and welcome our hero back." Okay." Borg's face was pale. He was in a daze. He took a step forward. Bang! Rosa and the others turned around in shock and saw Borg falling on his head in the tunnel. Josiah ran too fast. When Rosa and the others reached the center of the station, they saw him struggling to squeeze through the crowd. At this time, the station was full of joy. The pit was full of people hugging each other and jumping up and down. In the middle, a large group of people was clustered around something. Leader Rosa, we won." When they saw Rosa, the crowd made a path for him. The sound of joy came from all directions. Rosa was also full of joy and kept nodding in response. Gradually, as the crowd dispersed, the people who were surrounded in the middle came out. Rosa raised his eyebrows and showed a look of surprise. In front of him were dozens of men in ragged clothes. At this time, they were accepting the cheers of the crowd with a blank face. The people in the back who were full of nobility and looked ugly should be the important prisoners who were captured. But where was Tang? Where were the people in the gray space? Josiah finally squeezed in at this time. He glanced at the crowd in front of him and was suddenly stunned. Then he seemed to think of something. His body swayed, and his face instantly turned pale. Rosa held him. His lips moved, but he did not say anything in the end. The gray space had been missing for more than 10 days. It was normal if someone died in there, you are? After adjusting his mood, Rosa asked the group of people. A middle-aged man came out and bowed. "Hello, madam. I'm Fry. We were brought by Mr. Arthur." "Arthur," interrupted. Josiah wiped his eyes and quickly jumped out of Rosa's arms. "He brought you here? So Tang, Arthur is not dead?" "Of course not. He said he had to do something and left not long ago." Leader Rosa, TSK interrupted again. Fry opened his mouth and smiled bitterly. "Let me go. I have something important to report to Leader Rosa." After a while, a soldier who was sweating profusely squeezed in and quickly said, "Leader Rosa, a group of people just broke into the combat department. They are fighting now." "Oh no. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation." Chapter 211. The Combat Department, as the name suggested, was a department that guided and set up combat methods during wartime. The organization of the Gray Coat Army was somewhat different from other groups. The place where Rosa was located was the headquarters of the highest level. The atmosphere here was relatively relaxed, and there was no strict guard. Rosa could discuss important matters with several ministers here, and he would also chat with the civilians about trivial matters. However, the tactical department was different. No matter what time of day it was, there were soldiers guarding it tightly, and unrelated people were not allowed to get close. But now, this place was invaded by a group of uninvited guests. A few small groups of soldiers were quickly defeated outside. Although there were no casualties, the intruders had already forced them to the tents of the tactical department. This was not the fault of the soldiers for being lax. Previously, because of the news of the enemy's retreat, there was a lot of jubilation here, and the soldiers were almost busy celebrating. In addition, after this group of people was stopped earlier, their attitude was quite amiable. They showed a mission notice from the combat department and only said that they were looking for Officer Bull. Of course, these soldiers could not let them in with just a mission notice, so they only said that they would inform them. If Officer Bull wanted to see them, they would inform them separately. This was not a problem. After all, it was wartime now. Although there was news of the enemy's retreat, there might be more things to deal with here. Officer Bull was also a high-ranking officer here, so he was naturally very busy now. How could he have time to see these people who replied to the mission? However, these people immediately turned hostile after hearing this and directly broke in. The soldiers at the beginning were caught off guard and were quickly broken through. However, the tactical department naturally did not only have one line of defense. After the warning, a few more groups of soldiers hurried over. However, these people were quite skilled. Under the lead of the person in the lead with a dagger, they broke through several lines of defense in succession and went straight to the tents of the combat department. "Get lost!" With a loud shout, the soil was sent flying, and a soldier captain was thrown out, crushing a row of soldiers in front of the tents. Then, an ordinary-looking person narrowed his long and narrow eyes and led a dozen people to the open space outside the tent. Needless to say, this was naturally Tang In and the members of the Gray Space. When Tang In was being chased, he was always thinking about what their problem was this time. When they arrived at the designated location, they did not see the Gray Coat Army. Instead, they were surrounded by the brand's regular army. Moreover, in the following battle, he interrogated them more than once, but he did not get any information about the Gray Coat Army team passing through this place. The first time was because he didn't know. The second time, the third time, countless times, Tang In couldn't help but place his suspicion on the person who issued the mission. Swish, swish, swish. Breaking through to this point was the limit. The soldiers who heard the news drew their swords and surrounded them. David and the others weren't afraid. They formed a circle with their backs against each other. I don't want to kill anyone today. After taking a deep breath, Tang In said calmly, I'm here to seek an explanation. Ask Officer Bowl to come out and talk to me. Whoosh. The curtain was lifted, and a few people in high-grade armor walked out with furrowed brows. The soldiers parted, and the one at the front was a sturdy old general with white hair on his temples. Old General Omeng. Tang In bowed and saluted. You are Tang In? Omeng seemed to have a good memory, and he exclaimed in surprise. Yes, it's me. Haha, you're actually back. So, the retreat of the enemy just now was also due to you? He was indeed a veteran of the battlefield. After seeing Twain, he quickly connected the dots from before. Tang In nodded and spread out his hands. I accidentally caught some important people, so, good. Very good. Old General Omeng laughed loudly and then sighed. I didn't expect that a few of you could do something that tens of thousands of us couldn't do after more than 10 days of fighting. That's great. Haha. You are the hero of our gray coat army. Tang In shook his head gently. It's really just luck. Well, actually, I'm here to look for Officer Bowl. Bowl? Old General Omeng was stunned for a moment and then realized the meaning of Tang In's action. His face suddenly became a little embarrassed. Ahem, Tang In. That night, everyone was in a hurry to break out of the encirclement, so it was a little chaotic. The mission was issued by Bowl by mistake. Well, I'll apologize to you first. Bowl, come out and apologize to Tang In too. Bowl was one of the people who came out with the old general from the European Union. Ever since he knew Tang In's name, he was in a trance. He's back. He's back. Bowl. Old General Omeng frowned and turned to shout. Here. Bowl came back to his senses and hurriedly responded. What are you waiting for? Come out and apologize to Tang In quickly. Okay. Bowl adjusted his mood and walked out of the crowd, ready to bow and apologize. Wait. Tang In stepped aside and stared at Bowl. Mistake? So there was no such team? No. It was my mistake. I'm sorry, Tang. Tang In waved his hand to stop Bowl from speaking. He smacked his lips and said with a faint smile, Mistake? It was just a mistake. After a pause, Tang In turned his head and said, Take off your shirts. Yes, boss. The people in the gray space tore off the pieces of beggar clothes on their bodies. Whoosh! There was a little commotion among the soldiers around, and they kept exclaiming. The cold wind whistled, and more than a dozen naked strong men stood in the middle with their heads held high. Almost every part of his body was covered with wounds of various sizes. These soldiers who had been on the battlefield could naturally recognize that there were knife cuts, spear stabs, arrow piercings, and so on. Many of the wounds were not completely healed, and one could see the flesh and blood that had been turned over. His name is Luke. Tang In took a step back and pointed to the long scar on the man's lower abdomen. This is the knife he used to break out of the encirclement 11 days ago. He was almost cut in half at the waist. His name is Oz. These 3 scars are from the arrows he used to break out of the encirclement 10 days ago. At that time, the arrows penetrated his body. His name is the eyes of the surrounding soldiers changed. There was no longer hostility in them, only respect. These were not scars, these were medals. This was not a soldier, this was a hero. His name is Angus. He can't stand up now. He has a comminuted fracture. He was hit by a rock in the earthquake 7 days ago. Well, there's another person called Felix. I hope you remember this name. He's dead. He died in the earthquake. Inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale. After taking a few deep breaths, Tang In looked at Bowl quietly. I don't want to talk about how we survived the chase. I don't want to talk about how we dug underground for 6 days. I don't want to talk about how we buried our teammates. I just want to say now, F***CKU. Fuck your mother's mistake. Whoosh, a figure flashed. Tang In held Bowl in his hand and raised his dagger. Tang In, Omeng exclaimed. Stop. No. Omeng spread out his hands and pressed down. Tang In, I'm really sorry about what happened to you. But it was really an unintentional mistake. Yes, Bowl should be punished, but he doesn't deserve to die. Tang In frowned slightly and looked up. Old General Omeng, I said. I don't want to kill anyone today. Hiss. A line of blood appeared. To be continued. Sorry, I know it's not good to stop here. I'll make it up to you tomorrow. To be continued. If you like this work, you're welcome to come to vote. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 212. Ding. Sparks flashed, and a sheathed sword blocked the dagger. As a high-ranking officer of the Grey Coat Army and a noble, Bull naturally had good martial arts skills. Just now, Tangen's attack was too sudden, and his movement was too fast, so he was easily captured. Now that he reacted, how could he not resist? After blocking the attack, the sheath flew out, and with a flash of light, it went straight for Tangen's abdomen. Bang! Tangen frowned and waved his hand to hit the sword. Bull's reaction was fast, and with the force of this hit, he quickly retreated. Brother Tang, that was really a mistake, and I am willing to sincerely apologize. Although the enemy has retreated, there will definitely be follow-up actions. Don't you even give me a chance to redeem myself? Although Bull's words were hurried and fast, his meaning was more or less expressed. One had to admit that his brain was quite fast. On the one hand, he humbled himself and sincerely apologized. On the other hand, he was willing to continue to serve the Grey Coat Army, which was pitiful, and had won some sympathy from the surrounding soldiers. Yes, Brother Tang, the mistake has been made, and it is irreversible. Give Officer Bull a chance to redeem himself. Brother Tang, don't be impulsive. I think this is good. Why don't we ask Leader Luosa to judge? Tangen curled his lips and sneered, as if he was mocking him. Then, without saying a word, his body rushed forward, and bits of bloody light shrouded over. Hiss, good. Bull's heart was filled with murderous intent. To be honest, the previous plan did not kill Tangen, but instead allowed him to make such a great contribution, which was really beyond Bull's expectations. But now that Tangen was seeking revenge, it was normal for him to die under the sword, wasn't it? Sigh. Of course, on the surface, Bull still sighed and said reluctantly, If so, Brother Tang, be careful. Chi. The green battle energy around his body surged, and he instantly put on a battle energy armor. Then, he waved his long sword and set up layers of defensive sword shadows. Taking a defensive stance was an inevitable choice. First, it was because Tangen's body was too fast, and he needed to find out the truth. Second, no matter what, on the surface, Tangen and the others were in the right. So, Bull planned to let Tangen attack for a while, so that he could continue to build momentum and gain sympathy, and lay the groundwork for the next unintentional kill. Bolai's thoughts were thorough, but the situation that followed was completely out of his control. Ding, 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 ding. The blood-red dagger shadow was like a snake flicking its tongue as it easily broke through the layers of sword shadows in front of it. When it got close, the blood-red light expanded again and quickly wrapped around it like silk. How could this be? Bull was shocked. With a roar, the light of his dough Chi rose again. His sword Chi was like a waterfall as it quickly attacked. Bull. Originally, Bull thought there would be no problem. After all, both of them were much older. Whether it was combat experience or battle energy cultivation, he should have the absolute advantage. But in the instant of the exchange, the opponent's inconspicuous Bull directly broke his sword momentum. And the timing of the attack, the grasp of the battle rhythm. He was obviously an experienced master. Although Bull quickly adjusted his battle strategy from defense to offense, the situation was still unclear. Tangen's body was too fast, and Bull's Bull could not catch up. On the surface, his Bull, but in fact it hit nothing. The feeling of punching with all his strength, but landing on cotton was not good. Bull was so depressed that he almost wanted to vomit blood, and when he could not attack for a long time, the Bull was like a small arrow, constantly drilling into the battle energy armor. Break for me. Seeing that the situation was not good, Bull quickly used his killer move. Streaks of green sword light formed into arcs and exploded from the center of his body. In an instant, the space was filled with swirling and overflowing blade lights. "Get down!" General Omeng's expression changed as he yelled at the surrounding soldiers. Dochi did not recognize people. If they were hit by it, they would be sent flying, and if they were hit by it, they would be chopped in half. Bolai was forced into a corner. Tang and was like a shadow that kept appearing beside and behind him. He couldn't find him even if he wanted to attack. He had no choice but to use such a large area of effect skill. The combat skill of releasing battle chi could only be used by a senior warrior. Although Bo Lai's cultivation was only one step away from becoming a senior warrior, he was still able to use it with great difficulty. Whoosh! Tangen's figure suddenly flashed and appeared in front of him. Facing the incoming sword light, he looked pensive. Die. Bolai was ecstatic. Hiss! As he expected, the sword ray quickly cut through Tangen's waist. Whoosh! The surrounding soldiers were shocked. A hero who had made great contributions to the army was killed just like that? That's not right. Where's the blood? Bolai quickly realized that something was wrong. He widened his eyes and saw the figure that was cut off gradually fade and disappear. Whoosh! In front of the disappearing figure, Tangen's figure appeared again. He still had the same pensive expression. Cut off, whoosh, cut off. Whoosh! The soldiers who were lying on the ground were petrified. Only their pupils were moving left and right, reflecting Tangen's figure in the crisscrossing sword light. He was like a fish in water, flashing with ease, bringing a string of phantoms. His movements were casual, and his expression was monotonous. There was no sign of strain or tension. It was as if he wasn't walking in a tight and seamless sword light, but a fishnet full of loopholes. With the help of the ghostly body movement, the expressionless Tangen arrived in front of Bo Lai in a moment. Bo Lai subconsciously shouted and raised his sword. Puff! Blood suddenly appeared. The dagger penetrated the battle chi armor in the palm. Clang! The sword fell to the ground. Tangen stretched out his leg and kicked Bo Lai's knee. Kacha! Bo Lai groaned and half knelt on the ground. He leaned over and said softly, "Can you tell me why I can feel the killing intent from you?" Tangen was sensitive to killing intent. The reason why he had fought with Bo Lai for so long was that he felt a faint killing intent from him from the beginning. Tangen was very confused. They had no grievances, and today was the first time they met officially. Moreover, Bo Lai had caused them to be chased until now. Shouldn't he feel guilty? Where did this killing intent come from? That mission, you deliberately arranged it, right? I'm really curious. Did I, Tangen, offend you in any way? Bo Lai's face was pale, and beads of sweat slid down from his forehead. No, that was a mistake. Bo Lai knew very well that since he had lost the battle, he could only bite on this point to survive. Bang! Bo Lai's body was kicked a few meters away and fell heavily to the ground. A mistake. Tangen walked over again and bent over to pinch Bo Lai's calf. Kacha, kacha! The sound of bones breaking was like beans being fried. Bo Lai finally could not help but howl to the sky. TSK. Sorry, I made a mistake too. Tangen spread his hands and put his palms on Bo Lai's trembling leg again. Actually, I wanted to help you set your bones. Enough. Old General Omeng stepped forward and said in a low voice, "Brother Tang, Bo Lai was wrong first. Since you did not accept his verbal apology, you chose to use violence. Now that you have crushed his leg bone, it should be enough to offset it." Tangen stopped. A soft and majestic voice came from afar. "Leader Luo Sa. Leader Luo Sa." Amidst the continuous greeting, Luo Sha brought a group of people and walked over quickly. "Uncle!" A cry of surprise was heard, and then a figure flashed over. Bang! 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 After a short exchange of punches and kicks, the figure that was rushing over was instantly beaten back. He fell to the ground, rolled a few times, and stood up. It was Borg, who looked terrible. "Tang, I'm sorry, but before I'm done, no one can take him away," Tangen said firmly. The soldiers looked at each other and were speechless for a while. Luo Sa could not help but touch his forehead. This matter was indeed tricky. Originally, they had already dealt with Bo Lai. Logically, this matter should have been over. But now that Tang In and the others were back, it was reasonable for the victim to continue to seek justice. After thinking for a while, Luo Sa said, Tang In, Bo Lai's already been punished. His mistake does not deserve to die. Now, the problem between them was whether Bo Lai's mistake was unintentional or intentional. Tang In had made up his mind. He was almost certain that Bo Lai had done it intentionally. But something like killing intent was illusory. How could it be explained? You said that Bo Lai wanted to harm you, but what was his motive? There had to be a reason to harm someone. You have not even met each other. After a moment of silence, Tang In pursed his lips and said, I don't want to kill anyone today. Phew! Everyone could not help but breathe a sigh of relief. As long as he did not kill anyone, there was always room for negotiation. Tang In and the others were heroes. They did not want to face the situation of breaking with the Grey Coat Army. At this time, Tang In spoke again, but, as you said before, you have to be punished for doing wrong. I think the punishment now is not enough. Crunch, 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 his horse howl shook the sky. I wanted to break your hamstring, but since you like to dodge so much, then Tang In pressed his hands on Bo Lai's legs. His 10 fingers exerted force and crushed the bones of Bo Lai's legs into powder inch by inch. Hiss! Everyone looked at Bo Lai, who was rolling on the ground, and could not help but gasp. This was not killing anyone. This was more ruthless than killing someone. After doing all this, Tang In carried the semi-conscious Bo Lai and said, I am a very reasonable person. What you owe me, I will take back. This is what I took back for Angus first. Next, I will investigate this matter. If I find out that this was deliberately arranged by you, I will take back your life on behalf of Felix. After that, he loosened his grip, and Bo Lai fell to the ground like soft mud. During this time, no one noticed that a thick blood aura was instilled into Bo Lai's chest through Tang In's fingers. Then, under everyone's gaze, Tang In took a few steps back and bowed. Leader Luo Sa, I am tired. I will go back and rest first. I will report to you about the captives later. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 2:13. According to our reconnaissance, the enemy has retreated 10 miles away and has begun to build simple fortifications. There are no signs of an attack. The identities of the captives have been investigated. There are 7 sons of earls, 8 sons of marquises, and 3 sons of dukes. Their elders are the prime minister of the empire, the military law officer, the administrator. The tent was completely silent as they listened to this string of illustrious official titles being announced one after another. One had to know that these were only the immediate family members. If the marriage relationships between the nobles were taken into account, the elders of these captives might be able to capture the entire upper level of the empire in one fell swoop. Suddenly, an old and bold voice came from afar. Good. General Omeng's face was full of joy as he stroked his beard. With these people in our hands, let's see who dares to attack us. That's not what I'm concerned about. An old man in a gray robe couldn't help but pinch his fingers. I'm thinking about how many bags of rice, how many kilograms of flour, how many pieces of salt are these people worth? That's right. General Omeng slammed his palms together. We can also use them to exchange for some standard armors and weapons. If they're not willing, give us some metal and we can make them ourselves. TSK. If you give me 2 more Mjolnir, that would be even better. You old war lunatic. You really dare to dream. Why don't you just say that we will hand over the army to you directly? I don't mind. I just don't know if they are willing. In Rose's tent, the atmosphere was thick. A few old men in their 60s had red faces as they laughed and looked forward to their harvest this time. Capturing those noble youths this time could be said to be a strategic victory. Not only did they solve their own problems, they also brought about huge benefits. The Gray Coat Army, just from a name alone, one could tell how poor they were. At this moment, in the eyes of these people, those youths were no longer human. They had turned into a warehouse full of rice or shiny armors and weapons. Sigh, if only the elders of these youths were captured this time. Then our long-cherished wish for so many years might have come true. In the end, the leader dared to dream. If that's the case, wouldn't it be better to capture a brand king? There was a limit to the exchange of captives. It could be said that these youths could only be exchanged for something substantial. If the Gray Coat Army's plan was to be carried out just because of this, those great nobles would definitely forget that they still had a son who had been captured. All right. Rosa pressed his palms together and said seriously, "There's no need to rush this. The people from the Empire will be here in a few days. We just need to draw up an exchange list by then. Let's discuss how to treat the heroes." The tent fell silent as the several department heads looked at each other. They received the news a little late and did not personally witness what happened in the combat department. However, they still heard about the gray space beating people up. Alas, old General Omeng sighed and said with a complicated expression, "I've seen Bull's injuries. His hand is fine, but one of his legs has been completely crushed into powder. Unless the Archbishop of the Temple of Light comes, there's no hope for him to recover." The Archbishop of the Temple of Light was someone who had a close relationship with the royal family of the brand. It was difficult to even meet them, let alone heal the people of the Gray Coat Army. Therefore, Bull was destined to be accompanied by crutches for the rest of his life. So serious? One of the department heads frowned and said unhappily, "This Tang and is too cruel. He's one of his own. I heard that one of his subordinates died." Omeng naturally understood the friendship between fellow officers and explained. And for what he said, he seems to think that Bull did this intentionally. So, intentionally? Have they met before? How could Bull do such a thing? I don't think so. Old General Omeng stroked his beard and shook his head. Maybe this is just an excuse. Nonsense. I think it's necessary to punish him. But he's a hero after all. So what if he's a hero? He should be rewarded if he's meritorious and punished if he's wrong. Clap, clap. Rosa clapped his hands. What do you all think? Old General Omeng was the first to speak. I think that although Tangen's methods are a bit cruel, his contribution is still greater. This meant that his contributions outweighed his mistakes. Omeng still acted according to the rules. Although Bull was his subordinate, he did not have the slightest intention of favoring him. I also think that his contributions are greater. Of course, there should also be punishment measures. If he's wrong, we'll just follow the rules. He beat up a senior officer without permission. We can't set a precedent. I agree with you. I agree with old General Omeng. Not long after, several department heads expressed their opinions. Then, everyone's eyes focused on the curly-haired old man who had not spoken much. He was Borg's father, Bosco. I agree with old General Omeng. Several department heads were slightly stunned. To be honest, Tangen's contributions were obvious to everyone, so there was no doubt that his contributions outweighed his mistakes. The key question now was whether there should be punishment measures. The previous department heads said that there should be punishment. On one hand, it was their own opinion. On the other hand, it was also for department head Bosco. After all, their family members were beaten so badly. If they did not get something back, it was inevitable that they would feel unbalanced. But now, Bosco actually agreed with Omeng's opinion. That meant that there should be no punishment measures. Bosco stood up and said calmly, "The Gray Space Team did a good job this time. Their contributions are great. Let's not worry about the rest. We can't let the heroes be bitterly disappointed." This meeting was more casual. After Bosco expressed his opinion, everything was simple. Then, several people chatted for a while and gradually dispersed. Bosco smiled at the department heads outside the door and thanked them for their comforting words. Then he stepped away. After passing through a few passages, he came to a large group of tents. Their families had joined the gray space team together. There were many of them, so they usually lived together. Bosco went straight to one of the tents. As soon as he lifted the curtain, there was a burst of crying. The furnishings inside were simple. There were only simple beds, tables, and chairs. Borg and several other people were crying bitterly around Bull, who was lying on the bed. After seeing Bosco come in, these people immediately surrounded him and cried. Bosco was comforting a noble-looking woman and several half-grown children, who were Bolai's wives and children. Father, Borg also greeted him with red eyes. You must uphold justice for Uncle. Slap. The slap came so suddenly that there was a sudden silence. The woman and children still had tears on their faces. They stared blankly at Borg, who was slapped to the side. That's it for now. Don't worry. Bull will get better gradually. Well, you go out first. I have something to talk to Borg. Bosco's expression did not change. He still said gently to Bull's wife and children, "Air." The woman looked at Borg. Finally, she led the children out of the tent with a hesitant look. Bosco first walked to the bedside and checked Bull's condition. At this time, Bull had gone through a simple treatment and was in a coma. With a sigh, Bosco sat down on the chair. Stand up. Borg covered his mouth and stood up slowly. He was so scared that he did not dare to come close. As father and son, he certainly knew that the calmer Bosco was at this time, the angrier he was. He had not been beaten for many years. The last time he was beaten by his father was because he indulged in lust and wandered around the brothels with those noble young men. You did the gray space thing, right? Well, is it because of that, Josiah? Borg was so shocked that he couldn't say anything. He wanted to say no, but he knew that if he lied at this time, he might be beaten to death. It's really you. Bosco closed his eyes, took off the decorative curls on his head, and slowly pinched the bridge of his nose. Do you know why I beat you? It's because we set up the gray space team, Borg said honestly. You still don't understand. You still don't understand. Bosco's eyes suddenly opened. He was no longer gentle, but fierce and indifferent like a tiger. How many times do I have to say, no matter what you do, you must be simple and direct? Is it foolproof to let the gray space team out of here? Have you considered the possibility of them coming back? Have you come up with a way to deal with the variables? Can you expect to succeed if you leave everything to fate? We can't fail anymore. Last time's failure brought us here. Next time's failure may lead us directly to the God of Light. Do you understand? I understand. Borg nodded like a chicken pecking rice. I hope you really understand. An eagle won't pop out its claws before catching its prey. Petty tricks will only harm you. Bosco curled his lips. Just now in Rosa's room, we were discussing whether to punish the gray space team, and I objected. Do you know why? Air. Borg's heart was moved, and he quickly said, because we can't do any real harm to them. Yes, I understand a little. Bosco nodded and then sighed. Your uncle can't make any progress in the combat department, even if he recovers in the future. In this negotiation, I will find a way to let you participate and get some credit. Remember, you must take your uncle's place when he retires. Do you understand? Yes, I understand. Oh, and that Josiah, you still have to fight for her. She's very helpful to the rise of our family. Okay, but she seems to be more willing to get close to Tang In, Borg said with some frustration. You don't have to worry about that. Tang In. Bosco's eyes flashed coldly. He destroyed the position I tried so hard to get in the combat department. Humph. Puff. At this moment, Borai suddenly spat out a mouthful of blood and then struggled around with a hoarse voice. Pain, pain, pain. Then he stretched out his hands and kept scratching his chest. His clothes were quickly torn, and then his flesh was torn open. Bosco and Borg were shocked and quickly held his body down. What happened? I don't know, he was fine just now. Borg desperately held down Borai's waving arms. Pain, 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 ugh. Bang, bang, bang. Borai's body trembled as if he was shot by an arrow, and then blood burst everywhere, spraying on the tube beside him. Wheeze was like a fish out of water. Borai quickly went from gasping for air to gasping for breath. Bosco checked Borai's breath. His body, father, uncle, what happened to him? He's not dead. Maybe it's better if he's dead, Bosco said with a pale face. He was careless. Someone transferred fighting energy into his body. Now his body is damaged everywhere, and he's completely paralyzed. Ah, Borg's face changed dramatically. Who did it? Idiot. Who else could it be? Bosco squinted his eyes gloomily, crushing his leg bone to divert attention. How cruel! How vicious! This kid can't be left alive. Today is my birthday, so I've been delayed by many trivial matters. Well, Raccoon's character has failed once, so I'll make up for it tomorrow. To be continued. If you like this work, you're welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote. Your support is my biggest motivation. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.